Chapter 161, Getting Ready for Trouble. When Ethan learned that Nick Fury had arranged a face-to-face meeting between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, he realized it was the perfect moment to spring Red Tank and Emil Blonsky from their cell. With Rogers and Stark under the same roof, each wary of the other, both burdened by shadowy pasts, Ethan knew their mutual distrust would keep them off balance long enough for a rescue. He briefly considered ordering a direct Hydra raid on the prison, but that would risk exposing his own secret alliance with Black Caesar. Their partnership depended on plausible deniability. Caesar never suspected Ethan's true identity, and Ethan always made sure any unsanctioned dirty work could be blamed on rank-and-file operatives or, conveniently, on Tony's enthusiastic meddling. At first, Stark flat-out refused Ethan's proposal. But when Fury mentioned that a special guest was eager to meet him, Tony's curiosity overrode his caution. He agreed, though he insisted no one outside the Illuminati be allowed near the two Hydra subjects and refused to reveal the prison's coordinates. Hours later, Tony strode into the appointed room only to freeze in astonishment. Standing before him was the American soldier his father had spoken of in hushed tones, an unexpected face that would change everything. Ethan Stark pushed through the reinforced doors of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s training wing and locked eyes with Captain Steve Rogers. His voice was low, defiant. "So this was your plan all along? Hire an actor to throw me off the trail?" Steve regarded him coolly. "Ethan, I've met your father, Howard Stark. You don't fool me, though I've got to say you resemble him more in attitude than in looks." Ethan bristled. "Save it. I'm here to find out how deep S.H.I.E.L.D.'s conspiracy goes. Tell me, have you forgotten about Compound 1, the so-called Superman serum, the prototype suit?" Steve's jaw clenched. "I know enough to deal with you. You really think spouting Hydra slogans makes you untouchable? Long live Hydra," Ethan shot back, his tone mocking. "Is that rebellious enough for you, Captain?" Before Steve could reply, Nick Fury's voice crackled over the intercom. "Gentlemen, enough talk. Take it into the ring. I'm tired of running these tests on agents sporting compromised serums. Let's see what your metal's really made of." Steve nodded. "Come on." Ethan followed him down the corridor to a circular fight ring, its polished floor gleaming under bright lights. Around them, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in enhanced combat gear watched anxiously. Some had been injected with the unstable Compound 1. Fury wanted a decisive end to this showdown. Ethan cracked his knuckles. "Ready when you are, Rogers." Steve assumed his fighting stance. "Just try not to break a nail." Nick Fury leaned against the observation window, arms folded. "Make it quick. I've got a world to save, and I don't need your grandstanding slowing me down." With that, the door slid shut behind Ethan and Steve. The tension in the ring was electric. One punch would decide whose brand of justice truly had the upper hand. Steve and Tony's sparring match was over almost before it began. Despite everything Tony had gained from his overclock protocol and the advanced enhancements of Compound No. 2, he simply couldn't keep up with Steve's seasoned skill. 3 solid rounds later, Steve's fist connected cleanly, and Tony hit the mat. Steve offered a wry smile. "I thought you'd go down faster than that." Tony rose slowly, touching a split lip. He'd managed to dodge a handful of punches, but Steve's battlefield instincts and years of experience still carried the day. He shook out his arm. "Don't underestimate old-school techniques. They've got their advantages." "Round 2?" Steve asked, bouncing lightly on his feet. Tony straightened his shoulders. "Not today. Stark and I aren't here just to spar. We're tracing Hydra. They've vanished too cleanly for this to be just luck. Someone is pulling strings behind the scenes." At that moment, Nick Fury broke into the ring. He held up a hand to stop them both. "All right, that's enough. The result's obvious. Keep going, and it's just showboating. We've got bigger fish to fry." Nick Fury didn't have time for small talk. He glanced at Tony Stark and barked, "Cut to the chase. What do you want?" Tony hesitated for a moment. After their last showdown, he wasn't as quick to refuse. "Look, we've got people inside S.H.I.E.L.D., he began, "and we're an international intelligence organization, so we want custody of those 2 Hydra assets." Fury narrowed his eyes. "No matter how brilliant you, Ethan, and Banner think you are, you can't match S.H.I.E.L.D.'s global network." Tony ran a hand through his hair. "I can't decide this on my own. As members of the secret Illuminati Council, Stark, Ethan, and Banner, They had agreed to share responsibility for any major moves. Ethan had originally championed the idea of forming the Illuminati and even recommended recruiting the genius known as Doom. Tony couldn't simply declare those Hydra assets the Illuminati's property, nor promise Ethan exclusive custody if he captured them. He needed a group consensus. Ethan gave a slow nod. He had no objection. Any other stance would only muddy the waters later. Bruce Banner stood up and stretched. "You two work it out," he said easily. "I'm fine with whatever you decide." Tony sighed, but managed a small smile. "All right, let's hash this out." And with that, the three of them leaned in, ready to settle the question of who would lay claim to Hydra's secrets. Ethan never imagined himself as anything more than an ordinary member of the Illuminati. He had no grand ambitions beyond that. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers and Nick Fury finally got the meeting they'd been pushing for, face-to-face time with Emil Blonsky and James Rhodes, better known as the Abomination and War Machine. Ethan felt no rush to stage a breakout at the Hydra facility. Operations like that had to look plausible, a few staged mistakes here and there, so no one would suspect it was all too perfect. If they blew their cover by trying to reveal everything at once, everyone would smell a rat. Today, Ethan reported to Norman Osborn with good news. The research had borne fruit. All the Emperor Corporation wanted were samples of the Lizard Serum and the Green Goblin Serum, plus the full data packet. Norman agreed without hesitation. The Goblin formula was nearly perfected. Once its side effects were tamed, it would eclipse Compound 1 by boosting human strength and mental acuity up to 8 times normal. Compound 2 would leave its predecessor in the dust. At the same time, the Lizard Serum was on the brink of a breakthrough. Originally developed by Dr. Kurt Connors, its limb regeneration properties had been well understood ever since Peter Parker's and Mary Jane's remarkable recoveries. Yet under Norman's guidance, the formula was evolving beyond Dr. Connors' wildest hopes, promising not just regrowth, but true enhancement of the human body. Ethan surveyed the 2 vials before him with a satisfied smile. With the Lizard Serum safely under Hydra's control, there would be no awkward questions if a few lizard folk began to appear around the city. Connor's only reward would be dividends and the right to name the strain. After all, the serum itself belonged to Osborn Industries, so Norman still had the final say on its use. Now only 2 serums remained, the Spider variant and the Bat variant. Securing them would complete the so-called hodgepodge serum roster. The Lizard formula, already refined by Hydra's scientists and slated for the Emperor Company's enhancement program, offered a reversible metamorphosis far more stable than the original Compound 1. It was perfect for anyone unwilling to remain permanently reptilian, and its strength amplifications would give any supervillain alliance a serious edge. Ethan's mind shifted to the Green Goblin Serum. Its potency was staggering, 8 times as effective on mice as the Lizard Serum was on rodents, with only slightly less dramatic effects on humans. Paired with advanced goblin tech, it could turn even the mightiest hero into prey. So far, Spider-Man, Tobey's latest and most powerful incarnation, had survived every confrontation. None had ended in death, but Hydra wouldn't send just a handful of agents this time. They would stage a full-scale assault the city would never forget. "Hydra can't keep sending token squads," Ethan muttered. "It's time we made a real statement." Chapter 162, The Clairvoyant Considers a Career Change. Ethan surveyed the array of vials before him, each labeled as a variant of the original Super Soldier Serum. In the Marvel Universe, nearly every enhanced serum traces back to that pioneering formula, but most are twists on animal or insect genetics. Take the Spider Serum, for instance. Its foundation lay in Osborn Industries' archived data. Without those blueprints, the Super Spider program would have never left the lab. Yet the true marvel was the Parker's genetic lock. They encoded the Spider Serum to Peter's DNA so precisely that anyone else who tried it would suffer catastrophic failure. Only Peter Parker could merge with it successfully. Watching how smoothly they carried out this operation, Ethan couldn't help but be impressed and bewildered. If Norman Osborn hadn't been covertly in their corner, Aunt May and Uncle Ben might already be rotting in a Hydra detention cell, oblivious to why they'd been swept up. The Parkers took immense risks. Either they struck a dangerous bargain with Hydra, or they gambled recklessly with Ben and May's lives. Either way, they flagrantly trampled on every capitalist's moral baseline. Ethan pictured an alternative approach, a true businessman's tactic. Arrest Ben, May, and Peter Parker, then hold them as bargaining chips. That would force the Parkers to bend to any demand. But it never happened. Instead, they harnessed the serum's power and flew under the radar. As for the bat serum, that one traced back to Dr. Michael Morbius, the vampire scientist. His experiments on his own blood spawned a whole new line of enhancements, and a cautionary tale of science run amok. Ethan leaned back in his chair. With every breakthrough came more questions. Who really pulls the strings? And how far down this murky path would he be willing to go? Perhaps it was time to reconsider his own place in this world of serums, secrets, and super soldiers, before he, too, became a locked-in experiment. Michael Morbius is a world-renowned biochemist and Nobel Prize laureate who suffers from a rare, life-threatening blood disorder. In a desperate bid to cure himself, he first experimented with electric stimulation and ultimately turned to a colony of vampire bats. The result was horrifying. The treatment rewired his physiology, transforming him into a living vampire, forever dependent on human blood. Embracing his new condition, he rechristened himself Morbius, the living vampire. Driven by his insatiable thirst, he began preying on innocent victims and soon found himself at odds with Spider-Man. Over time, however, Morbius's conscience overcame his bloodlust. Determined to atone, he assumed the role of a vigilante and joined the supernatural superhero team known as the Midnight Suns. Though Morbius has never achieved the mainstream fame of other Marvel characters, he gained wider exposure during the 1994-1998 Spider-Man animated series. In that show, he shared a brief romantic connection with Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat. At one point, Morbius came dangerously close to turning her into a vampire. But Spider-Man intervened, and Felicia herself persuaded him to resist his darker impulses. Ethan's life changed forever the day his gene recombination device malfunctioned. In place of his own DNA, he'd accidentally spliced in the entire bat genome, and there was no going back. By all rights, he should have panicked. Instead, he simply thought of Felicia. His love for her was the one constant he still had. Fans of the animated series Ultimate Spider-Man, 2012 to 2017, will recognize a similar story in Season 4. Morbius, a Hydra operative, helps Dr. Octopus develop an anti-venom. When their serum succeeds, Doc Ock uses him as the perfect test subject, transforming him into a bat creature that can siphon life energy from any living thing. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the details differ slightly, but the stakes are just as high. Here, Ethan's obsession isn't just academic. He's determined to track down the original bat serum and the elusive Dr. Morbius who created it. Nick Fury knows better than to underestimate Ethan. Under Tony Stark's protest, Fury couldn't risk sending a full SHIELD strike team into the heart of Hydra's territory. Instead, he assembled a hand-picked quartet: Agent Phil Coulson, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow herself, Clint Barton, freshly freed from his duties after the Cosmic Cube vanished, and Agent Grant Garrett, who arrived of his own accord. Garrett insists this faction of Hydra, led by the warlord known as Black Caesar, represents a dangerous yet fragile hope, one they can't ignore. Now, deep in enemy territory, this small but formidable team prepares to interrogate Hydra scientists and recover the bat serum before Ethan, and whoever controls Morbius next, turns it into the deadliest weapon the world has ever seen. Ethan had once cultivated the air of a mysterious clairvoyant, dispensing cryptic prophecies and extravagant promises of insight. In reality, he was just an ordinary man whose life felt as fragile as a candle struggling against the wind. Stricken with a terminal illness and desperate for relief, he poured every last penny into experimental strength-enhancing serums. The most coveted of these was Compound No. 1 from Empire Pharmaceuticals, a treatment so expensive that only the very wealthy could afford it. When he received his first injection, Ethan was elated. For the first time in months, he felt vitality surge through him. His strength returned, his pain receded, and he dared to believe he was healed. But a follow-up examination shattered that illusion. The doctor explained that the serum had not cured his disease. Instead, it had merely supercharged his body's systems, masking the symptoms and giving him, and everyone around him, the false impression of recovery. Unbeknownst to Ethan, compound number 1 had also amplified every microbe living inside him. Viruses and bacteria that had coexisted harmlessly with his body were now stronger, more aggressive, and far more dangerous. In effect, the serum had bought him time, but at a terrible cost. When his illness inevitably flared up again, it would tear through him with greater ferocity, making his final moments far more agonizing than before. More troubling still was the broader implication. As more people embraced compound number 1, those same symbiotic pathogens would be supercharged in hosts across the globe. Humanity was on the brink of unleashing superviruses and superbacteria it had not yet learned to fight. Ethan realized he could no longer seek a solitary cure. If there was any hope of preventing a worldwide catastrophe, he would have to find and persuade others who understood the serum's true threat. Only together could they stand a chance of stopping the crisis they had unwittingly set in motion. Hydra undoubtedly has the resources to pull something like this off, especially now that Black Caesar has appeared on the scene with so many powered agents at his command. It strains credulity to believe they're all natural mutants. When true mutants awaken, they rarely stay hidden. A few might be quietly recruited through Hydra's intelligence apparatus, but 10 superpowered operatives with no records and no footprints. Either someone high up in Hydra is covering it up, or Black Caesar's team has discovered how to manufacture superhuman abilities. Garrett has also heard the rumors about the recent attack on Captain America. Witnesses claim the assailant was virtually immortal, only to die in a self-detonating bomb. But Coulson, who served alongside that man for years, refused to gloss over the truth. Before he died, the attacker cried out, "Long live Hydra." No one yet knows how far this conspiracy runs, but Garrett sees an opportunity he can't ignore. Black Caesar could be the key to Hydra's next phase, and Garrett has already approached Pierce to request a transfer into Caesar's operation. He won't let this chance slip away. Pierce's denial hit Garrett like a punch to the gut. "I have no intel on Black Caesar," Pierce insisted. Garrett stared at him in disbelief. How could there be no link, no channels of communication, between S.H.I.E.L.D.'s most feared agent and the Snakehead's supreme leader? It took only a moment for Garrett to piece it together. Pierce was blocking any transfer of power to Black Caesar. After all, although Garrett never rose to Hydra's Council of 12, his influence over S.H.I.E.L.D. rivaled Pierce's. In fact, Pierce had secretly pushed Garrett to turn against Hydra in the first place, spurring the organization's growth under Pierce's direction. If Garrett defected to Black Caesar now, Pierce would lose his grip on S.H.I.E.L.D. entirely. Of course, Pierce would refuse. But Garrett didn't care about Pierce's career. What mattered was his life. He was dying, and only the Black Caesar operation held the cure. If Pierce wouldn't cooperate, Garrett would come himself. Fury or no Fury, Hydra or no Hydra, he would drag the information out of Pierce by force if he had to. And today was the perfect moment. Pierce had invited the clairvoyant to lunch, practically handing Garrett an opening. He would show up unannounced, corner Pierce, and leave with the answers he needed. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in the shadows of the safe house, running it all through his mind. Coulson was on his way. If Hydra staged an assault the moment Coulson arrived, it would be a textbook trap. And with Nick Fury's murky loyalties and rumors of Skrulls infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., there was no telling whose side anyone was really on. One thing was clear. Ethan had to be ready for anything. Ethan decided it made sense to wait until they'd bolstered their numbers before launching a full-scale assault. That way, Tony Stark wouldn't be fooled by any more of Nick Fury's lies. Chapter 163, Prison Break. Garrett's voice cracked with desperation as he fixed Red Tank and Blonsky with a glare. "I want to know how to contact Black Caesar." Both men ignored him. Garrett's face twisted with rage. "Damn it! When I get out of here, I'll tear you in half." Red Tank thrashed against his restraints, eyes wild with the fear and pain of Hydra's interrogation methods. Blonsky, chained to the wall beside him, watched with a mixture of pity and contempt. He'd witnessed Hydra's torture firsthand and judged them as twisted sadists, but he'd cooperated quickly enough to avoid the worst. "I told you already," Blonsky said with a mocking grin. "We don't have any information." It was the truth. Their boss, Black Caesar, communicated through telepathy. No phone numbers, no secret drop points. Blonsky had no leads to give. Garrett's fist slammed against the bars. With nothing left to lose, he leaned close and whispered the one Hydra keyword guaranteed to draw attention. "Hi, Hydra." Blonsky snorted. "You think shouting a stupid catchphrase is going to save you?" "I've called in backup," Garrett snapped. "You just wait. Reinforcements are already in position." A sudden, resonant voice filled both Blonsky's and Red Tank's minds. "Leader." Blonsky's confident mask flickered. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to look composed as he met Garrett's anguished stare. Something had changed. Black Caesar was responding, and that meant the prison break was about to begin. Ethan's laser channel held. Inside the cavernous hangar-turned detention chamber, the hulking Red Tank pounded on the reinforced steel door. Each blow barely rattled the metal. Then, with a deep mechanical roar, the armored figure broke into laughter. "Ha! I knew it! I knew it!" Garrett, bound to a central column, blinked at the display panels. He'd hoped the secret passphrase would bend his captors to his will, but nothing happened. Before he could speak again, the doors rattled violently as gunfire erupted outside. Automatic weapons barked in rapid succession, and laser beams seared through the gloom. The barrage was swift, precise, a full-scale assault. From the elevated control room, Tony Stark studied his monitors. He'd never trusted S.H.I.E.L.D. to guard this facility, so he'd paired Ethan's suggestion, a dedicated high-energy laser channel to seal off every corridor, with an array of automated turrets and remote-controlled drones. Tony had grumbled that it was overkill, but when lives and national security were at stake, he'd conceded. He tapped the comlink. "Garrett, heard the fireworks. Care to explain your part in this?" Garrett's eyes widened as he realized the assault and the lockdown defenses were one and the same. "You think you can stop me? You're dead, Stark." Down below, the Red Tank's laughter rolled like thunder. Its owner, a prototype combat frame, remained impervious, unmoved by Garrett's defiance. Tony leaned back in his chair. In truth, the prison wasn't even fully built. To maintain absolute secrecy, he'd employed only omnics, robotic laborers, so no human voice would ever leak its location. And on a last-minute impulse, he'd housed the entire complex inside a retrofitted cargo plane. A mobile fortress. No one could storm it, and if things ever went sideways, he'd simply take off and vanish. He watched as the laser grids locked down the final corridor. "Nice try," he muttered, "but this chapter ends right here." Ethan stared up at the hulking structure hovering just above the ground. It wasn't a conventional prison, no clanking girders or heavy wheels to anchor it in place, but a semi-suspended fortress, free to roam wherever its masters willed. Once its stealth coatings were complete, anti-radar layers, encrypted signal dampeners, this mobile gale would become an unassailable bastille, untouchable by any outside force. But the project hadn't even reached that final stage before disaster struck. A battalion of lizard men poured through the tall gates, guns blazing. These creatures were Ethan's own creation, petty criminals plucked from drug rings, injected with a potent reptilian serum. The result was terrifying. Soldiers far stronger than Compound Number 1, each wielding 12.7mm automatic rifles with drum magazines. Their bodies were sheathed in super-heavy armor, crowned by 5-centimeter-thick Russian-style helmets. Bullets glanced off them, shrapnel ricocheted, and thanks to their accelerated healing factor, even grievous wounds knitted closed within minutes. S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives, and a handful of Hydra mercenaries who joined the project, met the onslaught with everything they had, but they quickly began to fall back under the lizard men's relentless advance. Had it not been for the prototype defense grid Tony Stark had coded into the prison's security system, automated turrets synchronized to every sensor array, Ethan shuddered to think how many more lives would have been lost. Despite the chaos, the floating prison held. But as sirens wailed and alarms blazed, Ethan realized two things. First, his fortress was far from complete, and second, whatever came next would push him, and his monstrous guards, to their absolute limits. Ethan pressed his back against the cold steel wall and watched the two figures loom before him. Obsidian's obsidian black armor absorbed the dim overhead light, while the hulking figure beside him, an ironclad giant dubbed Colossus, trod the floor with heavy, measured steps. This wasn't the mutant Colossus of Xavier's school, but a crude, iron-skinned duplicate Ethan had cobbled together in his workshop. Enhanced, remutated, it now rivaled the red tank's raw power, so long as the tank didn't go into a full-on charge. "They still need me to come in person," Obsidian murmured, his voice flat with contempt. Colossus rumbled agreement. Ethan's heart pounded as reptilian silhouettes pressed against the reinforced door on the other side of the room. Hydra's lizard soldiers, genetically modified foot soldiers, were notorious for brute strength. One of them hefted a bulky, modified anti-tank cannon, its barrel the size of Ethan's forearm. Without warning, the weapon barked. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber as the lizardman's first shot tore through Ethan's hastily reinforced alloy door. Fragments of steel and concrete showered the lab like deadly hail. Bang! Bang! Ethan ducked instinctively. The second blast ripped a jagged hole in the wall, and the lizardmen poured in, armored scales glinting with the unmistakable Hydra serpent logo etched on their chest plates. The creatures surged forward, snapping steel wrenches from workbenches and tearing out civilian security staff with savage efficiency. Ethan clenched his jaw, braced himself, and backed toward the corner as Obsidian and Colossus stepped forward to block the tide. "It's Hydra's doing," Ethan breathed, astonished. "They've mass-produced lizard soldiers?" A roar of metal against flesh followed, and the two goons in front of him fell silent. At that moment, the lab's main door smashed open as Tony Stark and Bruce Banner burst through the smoke cloud, Stark in his repulsor-studded Iron Man armor, Banner at his side. "Fly slower, Stark," Banner snapped, already scanning the scene for casualties. Stark hovered just above the floor, repulsors glowing. "Keep up, Bruce, and don't get your gamma anywhere near those scaly freaks." Ethan exhaled, steeling himself. The lab was lost. Now the question was, how to drive Hydra back, and what price they'd pay for invading his project. In the flickering alphanumerics of his datapad, Ethan summoned his own fail-safes. The real fight was about to begin. Ethan squared his shoulders. "I'll do my best, Banner," he said, locking eyes with Bruce Banner. Bruce offered a thin, encouraging smile. Just then, Tony Stark muttered under his breath, "I really shouldn't be trusting S.H.I.E.L.D. on this one, but here we go." An alarm shrieked through the prison hallways. Steve Rogers snapped into action, grabbing his shield. "Team, let's move." Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton fell in beside him, weapons at the ready. They turned the final corner and froze. Dozens of Hydra's lizard soldiers poured out of the cells, their scaly bodies clad in thick, gleaming alloy armor, the red Hydra emblem stamped across their chests. Clint loosed arrow after arrow, but each one pinged harmlessly off the reptilian plating. "You've got to be kidding," he muttered. "This armor's like an infantry fighting vehicles." Steve raised his shield just in time to absorb a savage blow from a charging soldier, the impact rattling his arms. Ethan dove behind a concrete pillar and lobbed a smoke grenade into the corridor, buying Banner a moment to tend to a wounded guard. Tony floated into position in his suit, repulsors glowing. "Stand back, Banner!" He unleashed a volley of blasts that tore chunks out of the corridor wall, yet the lizards kept coming, their vicious, hissing war cries echoing off the steel. Bruce moved quickly now, scanning the creatures for a vulnerability. Ethan readied his stun baton, knuckles whitening around the grip. He'd been nervous about this mission, but as a lizard soldier lunged at Natasha, Ethan rushed in and brought the baton down across its armored knuckles. The soldier shrieked, momentarily stunned. The corridor filled with smoke, energy blasts, and the clang of shield against scale. The Avengers braced themselves against Hydra's brutal onslaught, and in the chaos, Ethan found a fierce clarity. This was exactly where he belonged. Ethan's shield flashed with arcs of electricity as he held firm against the lizard man's charge, its vibranium surface absorbing every ounce of kinetic energy. Seizing the moment, Ethan thrust the razor-sharp rim of his shield into the creature's legs. He rarely employed the blade edge like this. Back in World War II, he'd simply drawn his pistol, but the move paid off. The vibranium cut clean through the alloy plating, tearing into flesh and spraying blood across the corridor floor. The creature recoiled, howling in pain, and slammed its claws against Ethan's shield. The impact reverberated through his arm, drove him backward, and sent him crashing into the wall. A heartbeat later, he was back on his feet, his superhuman endurance shielding him from any real harm. Down the hallway, Natasha Romanoff darted between two lizard men. She struck out with her electrified batons and wrist gauntlets, but the reptilian guard's armor held firm, and the narrow corridors offered no helpful cover or improvised weapons. Clint Barton, perched on a catwalk above them, was having marginally better luck. His arrows found the tiny gaps between the plates of the lizard men's defenses, felling one after another. Still, each downed foe seemed only to sharpen the other's resolve, and just then, a heavy step echoed from deeper within the lair. The temperature in the corridor dropped as the largest of the lizard men appeared, towering, armored, and more fearsome than any they'd faced so far. Ethan, Natasha, and Clint exchanged determined glances. The real battle was only beginning. Chapter 164, Fishing and Anti-Fishing. With the lizardmen soldiers pinned down by Steve and Black Widow, Obsidian and Colossus smashed through the enemy's defense line. Ethan stood to one side, jaw-dropping. Neither a hulking stone giant nor an ironclad Colossus belonged in any natural army, yet here they were, battering a prison wall like it was made of sand. Even the strongest alloy joints couldn't hold them back. Ethan had always been drawn to big, muscular heroes. Their sheer presence inspired confidence. In comparison, the skinnier types, like Ebony Maw, seemed outmatched before they even began. Watching Obsidian's massive fists swing through steel and concrete, he felt his own morale skyrocket. Across the courtyard, Agent Coulson and Garrett stumbled backward, faces drained of color. Neither had expected these two behemoths to arrive so swiftly. Now they were trapped between unstoppable force and immovable law. Obsidian didn't bother with words. One crushing punch was more than enough. He snarled, stepping forward like a predator closing on prey. Garrett's mind raced. If he revealed his Hydra allegiance now, Coulson would turn on him in an instant, but hesitation could be fatal. He raised a trembling hand to speak, ready to issue some coded command. 9. Before he could finish, a small metal can hurtled down from above, clanging onto the cracked stone floor and skidding to a stop between Obsidian's feet. The giant froze, brow furrowed in confusion. Ethan seized the moment. Voices echoed from the prison entrance as reinforcements appeared, shields at the ready. The distraction was enough. Obsidian hesitated, Colossus braced himself, and Steve and Black Widow regrouped to tighten the noose. In that instant of suspension, Garrett abandoned all pretense. He shoved Coulson aside and dashed for cover, desperate to vanish before anyone could question him further. But the momentum had shifted. The tide of battle was turning, and Ethan knew they had only just begun. "I knew you couldn't be trusted," Tony Stark growled as his armor whirred into action. Obsidian's fist came crashing down, but Iron Man was already in position. A glowing repulsor shield snapped into place, its surface alive with tens of thousands of nanobots. The force of the punch slammed into the barrier and was instantly neutralized, every ounce of kinetic energy absorbed and dispersed. From the edge of the hangar, Agent Garrett's voice trembled. "Mr. Stark." Director Phil Coulson cleared his throat, forcing a steady tone. "We believe in our S-Shield operatives, Tony." Tony's helmeted head tilted in disbelief. "So you're saying there's a traitor in my ranks?" With that, he powered up his right gauntlet and sent Obsidian hurtling across the room with a single, thunderous punch. Garrett flinched. Coulson exchanged an uneasy glance. Or maybe Hydra's intelligence network is more sophisticated than we realized. "Great," Tony muttered, rolling his eyes beneath the visor. "Everything was fine until you arrived. And then this guy, what did you call him, the black-skinned egg, walks in with half a dozen Hydra operatives under his arm." He tapped his wrist, where Jarvis's discreet interface blinked to life. "Jarvis, pull every data file on our people here. I want full background checks, right now." Tony Stark watched the comm feeds with a smirk. Hydra had made their move, dispatching squads to seize his flying prison ship, but he'd already laid the trap. He'd quietly warned Ethan and Dr. Bruce Banner to stand by, because he knew Hydra would take the bait. Red Tank and Bronsky might be stubborn, but anyone could be lured with the right ruse. When Hydra's Black Ops teams closed in, Stark put up only token resistance. After all, only S-Shield's inner circle and the secretive Illuminati knew the location of his mobile stronghold. Who would ever suspect that Hydra had infiltrated their ranks, or that JRVS had been compromised? Tony was banking on Hydra's misdirection. "Where's Ethan?" he barked, eyes darting between Agent Coulson and Banner. Coulson shifted uncomfortably. Hydra must have jammed his suit's comms. We've tried every channel. He's off the grid. Tony ran a hand through his hair. He'd pinged Ethan himself. No response. Ethan was out there somewhere, meeting someone as powerful as he was. If Hydra had cut him off, that suggested a terrifying sponsor behind the assault. Ethan was the deadliest opponent Stark had ever faced, and Stark didn't dare imagine what Hydra could do with him. So we're on our own, Tony said flatly. Not entirely, Coulson replied, tapping his earpiece. I've called in S-Shield air support. They'll arrive in minutes. Banner stood, jaw set. Then we'd better be ready. With that, the calm of the hangar shattered as Banner's clothes tore and his skin turned emerald green. In seconds, the Hulk towered over them, muscles rippling and a roar that made the walls tremble. Tony smiled, flipping open his gauntlet. Perfect. Let's show them what happens when you attack Stark Industries. Ethan's command echoed across the training chamber. Hulk, move it. With a grunt, the Hulk hefted the enormous broadsword Stark had provided and snapped on his new nano-armor. Now that he was an official member of the Illuminati, Tony Stark had outfitted him with every cutting-edge toy he could find, much to Hulk's chagrin, since he preferred to rely on raw strength. But Ethan had insisted he give the gear a fair shake, and even the Hulk knew better than to argue. Tony watched with an amused smirk as Hulk raised that clumsy blade overhead and charged toward Colossus. The metal-skinned giant, Ethan's own bold experiment to build a living fortress, stood his ground. When Hulk brought the sword down in a single savage arc, Colossus slammed his plated forearm across the blade, sparks flying in all directions. Bang! The force of the impact drove Hulk back 3 steps, and a clean scar now traced Colossus's arm. Hulk flexed his massive fists and grunted. Strong arm. Tony's grin widened. With a flick of his wrist, his suit's panels folded outward in a familiar cascade of nano-armor. From his gauntlet rose a halo of floating barrels, each humming softly with contained energy. One trigger pull unleashed a beam of cobalt blue plasma so beautiful it might have been harmless, if it weren't vaporizing everything in its path. A reptilian operative skittered into the beam's edge, and in an instant, half his body was gone. His protective suit did little more than buy him a moment of agony before the plasma jet burned straight through him. Tony tapped his gauntlet, the barrels retracted, and he cocked a brow at Ethan. Consider that a demonstration, he said lightly as the chamber's alarms blared. Next time, we'll try full auto. It's not unlike the Predator's plasma shoulder cannon, except this weapon doesn't rely on concussive force so much as it literally melts its target on contact. A focused jet of superheated plasma slices through armor, hull plating, even reinforced concrete. In practice, there's no defense it can't defeat. Its only real weakness is the floating support unit that powers it. Push the beam too long at full output, and the system risks overheating and shutting down. You'll often see it called either plasma gun or flux torch, but those are just 2 names for the same high-energy state of matter. The terminology split comes from different translations. Some manuals went with the purely scientific plasma, while field operatives coined flux torch to capture the weapon's fiery visual effect. Why not use lasers instead? After all, under equal power, a laser can reach even higher temperatures and generate stronger shock waves. In controlled tests against advanced ceramic steel composites, lasers can turn the surface into molten iron almost instantly, but they stop short of true vaporization. A plasma beam, by contrast, outright vaporizes the same samples in seconds. You can scale up a laser, mount it on a fixed emplacement or heavy vehicle to handle its massive power draw, but you sacrifice mobility and paint a giant target on your back. Portable plasma weapons, on the other hand, deliver genuine high-energy streams from compact platforms, making them the go-to choice whenever you need to melt a threat clean off the face of the battlefield. Chapter 7. Ethan crouched behind the shattered remains of an abandoned turret, heart-pounding as a volley of laser bolts hissed past. Even a single hit would slam him back 2 paces and sear through armor like a hot knife through steel. He gritted his teeth. No matter how advanced the laser array, it still fired only 1 shot at a time. 1 shot simply couldn't match the raw, destructive power of plasma. Laser rifles were fine against light infantry, but take them against heavy or super-heavy troops, and you'd be praying for a mecha escort. Beyond his cover, a tide of lizardmen surged forward, their reptilian war cries echoing across the ruined courtyard. Scale mail glinted in the fading light, but Ethan knew their true strength lay in regeneration. So long as a lizardman's head remained intact, it would knit itself back together, unless the wound was carbonized. Plasma's superheated blasts left blackened, charred flesh that had to be hacked away before any healing could begin. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, checking his HUD. "Has Hydra already rolled out lizardman battalions?" With a roar, he activated his suit's weapon systems. 4 hovering plasma drones erupted into life around him, their targeting lasers flaring. He tapped a command, full auto. Bolts of superheated plasma lanced into the charging horde, vaporizing scales and sinew. But for every creature he incinerated, 2 more spilled over the crumbling barricades. Ethan backpedaled, firing on the move. The courtyard's broken pillars offered fleeting cover, but each time he found safety, fresh enemies poured through the gaps. His nanoweave armor glowed with energy, cycling through shields. But the lizardmen pressed on, claws scraping metal and bone. He took a deep breath and sealed his visor. There was only one option: draw a line here and hold it, even if it meant fighting tooth and nail. Plasma reserves were finite. Once he'd exhausted them, only his sidearm and close-quarters combat skills would remain. Ethan steadied his aim at the nearest lizardman, its jaws snapping in a bone-chilling hiss, and squeezed the trigger. A searing bolt of plasma cut through darkness and fate. This was do or die, and he intended to survive. Chapter 165. Failure. The laser cannon had severed only a handful of lizardmen before Tony's team resorted to planting C4 charges and blowing them apart. It was clear the cannon excelled only in first strikes. Sustained volleys against these creatures were beyond its capability. Tony made a mental note of that shortcoming, though nobody suspected that Ethan had already pieced it together. Meanwhile, the Hulk was locked in Colossus's unbreakable grip, and Tony himself struggled against Obsidian's crushing hold. Obsidian dared not strike at Tony's plasma projector directly, yet the weapon was rapidly overheating. The custom cooling system could only handle 10 more discharges before it gave out. On the battlefield perimeter, Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye fought desperately to keep the lizardmen from reaching Abomination, Emil Blonsky, and the armored Red Tank, both of whom were pinned down under a rain of gunfire. Garrett, watching the melee unfold, recognized an opportunity to earn his promotion and possibly shift the outcome of the mission. He weighed his choices. Free Blonsky and Red Tank? Too predictable. They'd probably turn on him the moment they were released. Sabotage the defenders' lines to admit the lizardmen? That might be too clever by half, and equally self-defeating if Blonsky got loose. Garrett frowned. The battlefield was a tangle of battered heroes and snarling lizardmen, advanced weaponry and desperate close-quarters combat. Somewhere in that chaos lay his chance to prove himself, or to die trying. But first, he had to decide which threat he could manipulate without being crushed himself. He glanced toward the flickering plasma projector at Tony's side, and then back to the stalled line held by Steve and his friends. Ethan, standing just out of sight, watched Garrett with grim interest. The plan hadn't failed yet, but time was running out. Garrett's mind raced. Maybe he could sabotage the power supply, only to realize Tony had already planned for that. Each repulsion cage ran on its own self-contained microreactor, guaranteed to operate for centuries without a hiccup. Before Garrett could formulate a backup plan, a thunderous boom shook the corridor. He blacked out as a massive hole exploded in the wall. When he came to, he saw a pack of lizard-like aliens flooding in. Blonsky and the Red Tank practically vibrated with excitement. These creatures had planted explosives around the repulsion cage, determined to blow it apart regardless of who or what might be trapped inside. Smoke and sparks billowed through the hall. The Red Tank's enormous silhouette strode forward through the flames, his heavy boots cracking the scorched floor. Beside him, Blonsky's form warped, his skin taking on a sickly fluorescent green as he transformed into a towering abomination. Then a voice echoed inside their minds, cold, authoritative, unmistakably Black Caesar. Don't get drawn into a fight. Withdraw immediately. Red Tank froze mid-step, rage draining from his eyes. He hesitated, then reluctantly fell back. He'd learned the hard way that defying Black Caesar was not an option. Ethan's relentless assault had left Red Tank sprawled and beaten time and again. Now, after finally subduing him, it was clear even the Lord of the Crimson Dimension's backing couldn't make Red Tank invincible. Both Black Caesar and Ethan outclassed him. Tony Stark and the Hulk wouldn't have let the Hydra Enforcer slip away anyway, but in a last, desperate act, the lizard-like operative triggered a suicide bomb. The explosion was so massive the entire prison shattered around them. Tony staggered upright through the dust and debris, one hand pressed against his dented armor. "Jarvis," he barked into his comlink, "what's the Angel of Peace network picking up? Any trace of Hydra?" "Sir, I'm afraid we've lost their signal," answered Jarvis, his tone eerily calm. "The Angel of Peace surveillance grid is experiencing interference. We can't track them." Tony's fist slammed a nearby support beam. "Interference? That's impossible. Angel of Peace isn't just a satellite or a single camera feed. It integrates every signal transmitter on Earth. Any device that sends data becomes part of its network. How could they block us out?" At that moment, Ethan stepped forward, brushing ash from his gauntlet. He exchanged a hard look with Tony. "They've covered their tracks well," he said quietly, "but they didn't count on us closing in this fast." Tony nodded grimly. "Then we find a way to get the network back online, and we hunt every last Hydra cell until we find them." The two heroes stood amid the wreckage, ready to plunge back into the chase. If Hydra thought they could vanish behind a jamming signal, they'd just given Tony and Ethan the best reason yet to push their technology and themselves even further. Tony approached Ethan, who looked completely unscathed, as if he hadn't just survived a harrowing ordeal. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Ethan's face remained impassive, his breathing steady. "I ran into a rather troublesome ability. It trapped me in another dimension, but I finally found my way out." Tony blinked in surprise. He'd pictured Ethan pitted against some fearsome superpowered foe, but it was an ability itself that had done the trapping. On second thought, it made sense. Ethan's own powers could be just as confining as any enemy. "Don't worry," Ethan added. "I've already charted that dimension's parameters. Next time I slip through, I can get back in and out instantly." Tony exhaled, relief washing over him. Only someone with Ethan's confidence could turn an interdimensional imprisonment into a routine technicality. "Wait, how do you manage that?" he asked. Ethan's pale eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. "My vision isn't limited to the normal light spectrum. I see wavelengths, colors, and energies invisible to everyone else. What looks uniformly hostile to most people actually holds countless exit points, if you know how and where to look." Tony fell silent, struggling to picture a world of hidden colors and energies. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry." Ethan tilted his head, surprised. "Why are you apologizing?" Tony ran a hand through his hair, a sheepish grin tugging at his lips. "For underestimating you." Ethan allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "Fair enough. Thanks to me, Bronsky and the others got out alive." Tony's cheeks burned with embarrassment and frustration. Ever since his run-in with Hydra, it felt as though they were one step ahead of him at every turn. He even began doubting himself. "So that's why," he muttered. "No need to apologize. I signed off on this from the start. Are we, the Illuminati, really so eager to write off a failing organization?" Ethan shook his head. Tony fell silent, struck by a rare, genuine warmth, though he'd never admit it aloud. He simply nodded and let the gratitude sit unspoken in his chest. At that moment, Steve Rogers and the others arrived. Steve's eyes widened. This was his first encounter with Ethan, and he was immediately impressed by the young agent's calm confidence. "Still hanging around?" Tony called after them, scowling. "Go on, let that dark-skinned egghead drag you off." Ethan met Tony's glare coolly. "Like I said, I'm watching every one of you. I'll uncover each of your true identities, and if any of you are Hydra, you won't slip away unnoticed. You all know what I'm capable of." Tony's words hung in the air, but the dozen agents lined up before him betrayed no emotion, no flinch, no change in expression. If Hydra had truly trained its operatives this well, what was the point of rooting them out? Tony let out a short, frustrated grunt. "Stark," Steve began, but Tony cut him off with a dismissive wave. "We're done here." With that, the Hydra contingent was ordered out. There was no longer any trust, no reason to keep them around. Steve turned to Ethan, offering a quiet farewell. Ethan simply inclined his head. Always reserved, He never let anyone see what he was really thinking. Meanwhile, Nick Fury stood at the edge of the room, arms folded, his jaw tight. He seriously cons, Idra dosing every suspect with Veritaserum, his so-called confession water, to flush out the last Hydra sympathizers. But he hesitated. The drug carried serious neurological risks, and many of those men and women were registered S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. In the end, even Fury recognized there were lines you just didn't cross. Chapter 166. Chimera, Bronsky S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Agent Number 1, had no inkling that if Nick Fury pressed this operation forward, as many as 10 S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives would end up uncovering at least 9 Hydra agents. Meanwhile, Director Pierce was about to lose his temper. He just learned that Agent Garrett had covertly interrogated 2 of Black Caesar's lieutenants. Of all the people Garrett could have targeted, why those 2? Pierce was this close to summoning him for a dressing down. Garrett's rogue move had put their entire Hydra network at risk. After all, Black Caesar hadn't reached out to S.H.I.E.L.D. They were relying on those captives to reopen the line of communication. But then Pierce hesitated. Paranoia was a dangerous thing. Once you started overthinking, there was no telling where it would lead. So he gave himself just one nagging question. Why had Black Caesar's operatives turned up barely a day after Garrett's visit? Had Garrett secretly struck a deal with Black Caesar? Or had he even gone so far as to help Bronsky and the others break out of detention? Pierce replayed the timeline in his mind. Something about the whole affair smelled of deeper conspiracies he hadn't yet foreseen. The critical concern now was whether Garrett had genuinely made contact with Black Caesar and what he'd promised in return. Had Garrett really reached out to Black Caesar? If so, could Pierce still trust Garrett's branch of Hydra? If Garrett had secretly helped Bronsky and the others escape, that would be nothing less than outright betrayal, and it would leave Hydra's leadership dangerously exposed. What, then, was Black Caesar plotting? They hadn't heard from him in weeks, and all attempts to locate his cell had failed. Pierce tapped a code into his communicator. Shut down every line to Garrett's division. Don't let anyone know why. Moments later, he summoned his most trusted aide, the bald man with steel-rimmed glasses, Sitwell. Sitwell entered the office and snapped to attention. "Sir?" Pierce's expression was grim. "Tell no one outside this room what I'm about to say." "Understood, sir." Sitwell bowed his head. "What's the situation?" Pierce let out a low breath. "I have reason to believe Garrett may have betrayed us." Sitwell's eyes widened. He and Garrett were equals in Hydra's secret hierarchy, 2 co-leaders at the very top. If Garrett had turned traitor, it spelled nothing but chaos for them all. "Are we sure Garrett didn't actually betray Hydra?" Pierce frowned, massaging his temples. "If he did, would Hydra just sit back and let him go?" "It's not that he betrayed Hydra," Sitwell replied, relief evident in his voice, "but it looks like he defected to Black Caesar. If that's true, Black Caesar would have every reason to stick his nose into S.H.I.E.L.D.'s business." Pierce let out a low whistle. "So that's the situation." Sitwell settled back in his chair. At least Garrett hadn't turned code against Hydra. As for Black Caesar, well, Sitwell wouldn't mind jumping ship himself. With all the warring Hydra factions splintering off these days, Black Caesar's outfit was the most formidable. They robbed and killed with abandon. No need to skulk in the shadows and weigh every move. Black Caesar's gang embodied unapologetic power. Hydra might despise their lawlessness, but they had to admit Black Caesar was smart about it. His men were bold, yet disciplined. Even Hydra's supreme leaders couldn't dig up a single scrap of intel on him. Who wouldn't want a boss like that? Of course, Sitwell knew better than to ask Pierce or anyone else for an introduction. If they could reach Black Caesar, they'd have done it already. Meanwhile, Bronsky and Red Tank had slipped away to bring word, and perhaps new recruits, back to Black Caesar's hidden stronghold. Ethan studied Bronsky intently before speaking. "Bronsky, do you want to become stronger?" Bronsky glanced at Black Caesar, and, without a moment's hesitation, nodded eagerly. "Yes, boss. If it makes me stronger, I'll do anything." Ethan gave him an approving smile. "Good, your physiology is exceptional. Few people could handle so many human enhancements. What you're missing now is potent regenerative ability and a few targeted upgrades." He stepped closer to the hulking figure before him. "If I hadn't secured Captain America's super soldier serum, I might have used that." Ethan admitted, but I've already obtained 3 more exotic serums: the lizard serum, the green goblin serum, and, most recently, the spider serum. Bronsky's eyes widened. You got all 3? Ethan nodded. I did. The Parkers tried to safeguard the spider serum with a genetic lock, but it took me only hours to crack it. There was no need to breed super spiders or wait for them to bite you. We'll inject it directly. He raised a syringe filled with a shimmering green fluid. Once I inject this cocktail, you'll transcend your current Hulk form. You'll become something new, a chimera. Bronsky's pulse quickened. Chimera? In the broadest sense, Ethan explained, a chimera is someone whose cells carry 2 or more distinct sets of DNA. By combining reptilian regeneration, goblin-enhanced strength, and arachnid reflexes with your Hulk power, you'll become the ultimate hybrid. He placed a firm hand on Bronsky's massive shoulder. Get ready. As Bronsky steeled himself for the transformation ahead, Ethan prepared to rewrite the boundaries of superhuman potential. Ethan paused, tapping a file on the desk. In medical genetics, there's something called the chimera phenomenon, when a single individual carries 4 distinct sets of DNA. It's rare, and it's what you are. Bronsky frowned. Chimera? Like the mythological creature? Ethan gave a wry smile. Exactly. Only here it's not fire-breathing monsters, but 4 different genetic blueprints coexisting in one person. He shook his head. I know it sounds strange. Trust me, I've had to explain it more times than I can count. But that's your reality. Bronsky ran a hand through his hair. And you're saying I'm a living chimera? Precisely. Ethan leaned forward. Now that we've got that straight, let's move on to the lizard serum trial. He swept aside a protective cover to reveal a set of vials glowing faintly under the lab lights. Your genes have an extraordinary potential to act as a universal vector, a container for foreign genetic material. What we don't yet know is your upper limit. That's where this serum comes in. Its regenerative properties should expand your gene-carrying capacity. He paused, recalling the Super Seminary trials. Back at the Super Seminary, our test subjects could handle at least 2 distinct supergenetic modules. With you, we might push even further, but first, we need to see how your genome responds to the lizard serum. Bronsky nodded, a mix of awe and apprehension in his eyes. Let's do it. Ethan watched as the thick, green serum coursed into Blonsky's veins. Almost instantly, a white-hot agony tore through every fiber of his body, like countless knives clawing and drilling him from the inside out. Though Blonsky had faced hundreds of battles and survived countless wounds, this pain was beyond anything he'd ever known. His knuckles turned bone white against the metal table. He gasped, voice ragged, "The genes, they're conflicting. But I can still hold on." Ethan didn't need any monitors to see what was happening. His unique gift let him peer directly into the raging storm inside Blonsky's cells. Under the serum's influence, raw, gamma-charged blood from the Hulk, Blonsky's DNA was literally rewriting itself. The transformation was brutal, merciless. Bones shifted, tissue ruptured, and new, inhuman strength began to coalesce beneath his skin. Any ordinary subject would have died within seconds. Yet Blonsky's extraordinary physiology clung to life, even as his body wavered between man and monster. Ethan leaned in, eyes calm but intense. He had to make sure Blonsky didn't tear himself apart before the procedure was complete. If the genetic conflict won, they'd lose everything. But if Blonsky survived it, they might just have created the most powerful weapon the world had ever seen. Chapter 167, Triple Serum Enhancement. Ethan watched with cold fascination as Bronsky convulsed on the operating table. The lizard serum, long dormant in his genome, had just been unleashed, and the results were horrific. Where once stood a man, now writhed a scaly brute. His skin bubbled and cracked, revealing mottled green ridges beneath. His muscles bulged unnaturally, and with a sickening snap of joints, a second pair of arms erupted from his torso. The creature's guttural roars echoed through the lab as it staggered upright, 4 spindly limbs scraping against the metal floor. It wasn't a simple gene insertion. In the original studies, the lizard serum bridged empty slots in human DNA, grafting reptilian traits onto an otherwise unmodified host. Bronsky, however, was already a walking cocktail of enhancements. His body held fragments of Hulk, infused traces of Doomsday, and now those latent sequences awakened as though they'd been waiting for this moment. The lizard serum didn't just add new code. It traced through every buried strand, flicking switches that sent his evolution careening off the charts. Ethan leaned back against the observation window, arms folded. He'd considered deploying the Extremis virus next. If injected, it could rewrite and splice genes at will, call up Thor's lightning, Hulk's strength, even alien DNA no one had ever cataloged. In theory, Extremis could have woven together every fragment inside Bronsky, forging a being more powerful than any single super soldier. But Extremis had its limits, and Tony Stark's labs had already shown its unpredictable side. Worse, Ethan knew it could never replicate the cosmic might of the Reality Stone, something he valued far more than any biotech innovation. He let himself smile. Why rush to Extremis when the spectacle unfolding before him was so delightfully grotesque? Let Bronsky's agony play out. Let every last reptilian scale form. Let those extra arms swipe fractures in the reinforced glass. Ethan wanted a show, an unforgettable demonstration of what happened when you meddled with forces beyond human ken. He'd get to Extremis eventually, revel in its chaos too, but not yet. Tonight, the lizard serum would have the stage all to itself. Ethan watched as the lizard serum coursed through Bronsky's veins. Within seconds, a fine mesh of scales spread across his skin, giving him a cold reptilian sheen. Bronsky threw back his head and roared, "Power!" Pain and ecstasy warred in his mind, shattering all thought except one driving impulse: grow stronger. Ethan's eyes were impassive as he reached into Bronsky's consciousness. "The serum's only real boost is to your regeneration," he said, his voice carrying with telepathic clarity. "Other than that, you're the same man you were 5 minutes ago. Congratulations, you're now tougher than any lizard man. A clean decapitation won't kill you unless you're incinerated to ash." Bronsky trembled as his new scales rippled. Ethan's tone turned cautionary. "But don't test that too literally. If your head is destroyed, the brain that regrows won't hold your memories. In the eyes of the law, that's as good as killing you." Bronsky flinched. He wasn't Wolverine. Wolverine's skull is laced with adamantium, shielding his brain from harm. Even when Agent Zero managed to fire an adamantium bullet into Logan's head, Wolverine survived, yet lost part of his memory. The regenerated tissue was a blank slate, void of the man who'd come before. Ethan watched Bronsky's face tighten as he tried to process his words. "Keep in mind," Ethan said quietly, "what survives when your damaged head, or even your entire body, regrows isn't physical matter. It's these strange, intangible forces, not raw flesh or bone." Bronsky swallowed hard. He'd assumed that after regeneration he could do anything he liked, rewrite himself from the ground up, but now the implications settled over him like ice. Formatting the brain, yes, but formatting the whole person? He wouldn't even be himself anymore. "I understand, sir," Bronsky managed. "Good." Ethan stepped forward. "Next, spider serum. It'll heighten your senses." With a subtle gesture, Ethan lifted a small vial using telekinesis, then guided the syringe needle into Bronsky's arm. The serum flowed in. Immediately, Bronsky's previously stabilized genes flared into conflict. Ethan had never attempted to engineer a giant superpowered spider. Instead, he'd chosen one of the most adaptable, least lethal species, the common jumping spider. He'd extracted its venom, combined it with the spider's own biochemical formula, and refined it into this serum. "You might feel some unusual side effects," Ethan warned, as Bronsky's vision sharpened, his nerves buzzing. "You'll likely be able to spin silk. Nothing too dramatic, but enough to get you out of a tight spot. A wolf spider or a black widow would have been overkill, and potentially lethal. You're not here to kill people with venom. You need mobility and subtlety." Bronsky flexed his fingers, already noticing a fine, web-like residue forming between his fingertips. He nodded, steeling himself for whatever came next. Whatever this mission required, he'd be ready. Ethan watched as the spider serum bonded almost instantaneously, no doubt aided by the prior effects of the lizard serum. Once enhanced, Bronsky could hurl his multi-ton bulk skyward with effortless, long-distance leaps that bordered on flight. "Now for the Green Goblin serum," Ethan said, turning to his test subject. "This one has to be dosed precisely around your physiology. Too little, and you see nothing. Too much, and who knows what happens." He admitted he hadn't yet determined the serum's upper limits, only that it unlocked latent potential in every organism it touched. In old comic lore, the Green Goblin formula spawned monstrous creations, a pack of Hulk-sized dogs, for instance. In Ethan's own trials, white mice had already shown 8-fold increases in strength and intelligence. If it could do that to rodents, what might it do to something larger? With those possibilities in mind, Ethan prepared a full 1,000 liters of Green Goblin serum. Instead of the weak gains from oral dosing, as Norman Osborn had experienced, he opted to aerosolize the compound. Inhalation promised far greater absorption than drinking it, though still slightly less than direct injection. Secure in his decision, Ethan activated the nebulizer and readied Bronsky for the final, most unpredictable stage of enhancement. Ethan had devised a two-pronged strategy, aerosolized inhalation paired with direct serum injections. Bronsky, driven by a single-minded obsession with power, had been administering 3 injections a day without once pausing to consider the risk of genetic collapse. It was a reckless pace, but only someone as desperate as him would dare push so far. Now, with every precaution in place, Ethan activated the delivery device. A billowing cloud of green mist hissed through Bronsky's respirator, flooding his lungs with the aerosolized serum. At the same time, a dozen microneedles embedded themselves along Bronsky's arms and torso, injecting the concentrated Green Goblin serum deep into his bloodstream. Ethan watched, heart pounding, as Bronsky's cells convulsed under the assault. Microscopic membranes ruptured, then reassembled into ever more potent forms, each wave of transformation more dramatic than the last. Ethan counted in a low voice, 2 times, 4, 7, 8. By the 10th surge, Bronsky slumped, unconscious. Ethan hesitated only when he saw the telltale signs of cellular collapse, the very fabric of Bronsky's tissues beginning to unravel. It was precisely why Ethan had included stabilization protocols derived from the lizard serum, but even that could only hold the breakdown at bay, not reverse it. As soon as he was sure Bronsky's body was on the brink of total failure, Ethan shut the system down. 30 torturous hours later, Bronsky stirred. When his eyes cracked open, the first thing he registered was the cold gleam of metal bedrail. With a single effortless grip, he crushed it into jagged IECs. He sat up, chest rising and falling, every fiber of his being humming with a raw, newfound power. He was different now, far stronger than before, and only Ethan knew how close they had both come to disaster. Chapter 7. Unleashed Power. Ethan's voice echoed in Bronsky's mind, calm but confident. Your current physical strength has increased 15-fold. After you complete the transformation, it should be at least 10 times stronger still. 15 times? Bronsky whispered, awe and excitement battling in his eyes. He flexed his fingers, watching the veins ripple beneath his skin. Even without the full transformation, I'm that strong now? Nothing in these shells can harm me? That's right, Ethan replied. He'd run the numbers a dozen times over. Your reinforced musculature and bone density far exceed any earthly standard. The shell plating you're wearing won't scratch you, no matter the weapon. Bronsky let out a low laugh. He'd been eager to prove himself since the facility's champion, Red Tank, returned from the last mission. And now there was this newcomer everyone called Stealer, a mutant warrior whose reputation for raw speed and power was only matched by his mystery. Bronsky yearned to face them both, to carve out his place on the roster once and for all. Ethan, however, had reservations. He knew Bronsky's spirit was unbreakable, but the combat tests between the top 3 usually ended in chaos, and not the kind they could afford right now. I'd still prefer to wait, Ethan urged. Finish your transformation experiment first, then we can challenge both Red Tank and Stealer in one clean sweep. But Bronsky was already striding toward the combat arena, heart pounding with anticipation. I've waited long enough, he said over the mental link. I want to see what I can do today, not tomorrow. Ethan sighed. He admired Bronsky's courage, but he knew this could spiral out of control. In the arena, a ring of observation seats surrounded a wide, steel-reinforced floor. The crowd fell silent as Bronsky stepped in, chest heaving. Red Tank rumbled forward, stoic as ever, while Stealer hovered at the edge, nimble and cold-eyed. The referee's horn signaled the start. Red Tank lunged first, his gauntleted fist swinging like a battering ram. Bronsky met the blow head-on, his enhanced arms absorbing the impact without a flicker of pain. He countered with a crushing punch to Red Tank's ribs that sent his rival skidding across the arena floor. Steeler charged next, blades flashing in the overhead lights. Bronski sidestepped, grabbed the mutant by the throat, and flung him into the far wall with such force that metal plating buckled under the impact. Steeler hit the ground heavily, struggling to rise. Within seconds, it was over. Bronski stood alone in the ring, chest heaving with victorious breath. Silent applause rippled through the stands. Even Red Tank and Steeler, battered but unbowed, knew they'd faced something extraordinary. In the control room, Ethan allowed himself a small, proud smile. Bronski had done more than prove his strength. He'd announced himself as a force to be reckoned with. And tomorrow, when the transformation was complete, there would be no limits. Chapter 168, Stimulate the World X, Let It Burn. Ethan braced himself. If the Red Tank went into full charge mode, its limitless power would be all but unstoppable. Even Bronski, who'd grown exponentially stronger, could only dodge its blows. Yet the creature no longer radiated pure malice. Instead, he walked upright like some nightmarish reptile, sporting a tail both longer and heavier than his own height. That massive appendage kept him balanced, but it was anything but cumbersome. Bronski wielded it with uncanny finesse, whipping it through the air at supersonic speeds. Ethan ran the numbers in his head. A full-force tail strike would carve a razor-sharp air blade capable of shearing through tank armor. He couldn't help but wonder if Osborne Industries had dosed the lizard serum with something even more extreme. Godzilla DNA, maybe? After all, Bronski's transformation now made him look like a mini kaiju, complete with that eerie, scaly green hide. And as terrifying as it was, Ethan knew one thing for sure. This battle was only just beginning. Each species has its own genetic blueprint and body mass, so any serum we produce must have its decay rate parameters finely tuned to that particular organism. Ethan didn't waste time asking Peter Parker for confirmation. He doubted the young Spider-Man even cared about enzyme kinetics. In minutes, Ethan's supercharged intellect had rederived the decay rate equations from scratch. In the Marvel world, most of the high-octane serums come from animals. The spider serum and lizard serum are the classics. The bat serum is so obscure that only a few insiders even know of its existence. But a new vampire serum has quietly emerged. Its bioengineered strain is potent enough to overpower the vampires Blade has spent his life hunting. Even the old, pure-blooded vampires would be hard-pressed to rival it. Ethan flipped through the dossier on Osborne Industries' Lizard Serum project. No one ever claimed they'd exhumed Godzilla to harvest his DNA. Dr. Kurt Connors, who leads the cross-species gene splice initiative, certainly hasn't turned himself into a monster. Yet Hydra has already reverse-engineered the lizard serum production process, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is on high alert. Ethan tapped his pen against the file. Now that he'd cracked the decay rate formula, the real challenge began, staying one step ahead of Hydra, and making sure the wrong people never get their hands on this technology. Nick Fury stared down the long mahogany table in the UN Security Council chamber, steeling himself. He'd reached the limit of what S.H.I.E.L.D. could accomplish in secret. Now, with Hydra's resurgence manifesting as mass-produced lizard soldiers and a growing roster of city-wrecking superhumans, the threat had outgrown even his shadow network. Fury cleared his throat and began briefing the assembled diplomats and military chiefs. As of today, he said, Hydra isn't just a sleeper cell or scattered terror cells. They're back on their feet and stronger than ever. Not only have they perfected bioengineered combat units, they've recruited powered operatives who can bring entire metropolises to their knees. No single nation has the capacity to confront that, and since Hydra operates outside any government, there's no back channel, no treaty to enforce. It's pure anarchy with strategic planning. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The heads of state and defense ministers exchanged worried glances. Even the world's top 5 arms suppliers, who prided themselves on never turning down a government contract, sat in silence, aware that a private organization wielding such power effectively outranked them all. After Fury's presentation, Tony Stark leaned forward in his seat. He hadn't always trusted Nick Fury's methods, but this time there was no question of withholding information. He tapped his earpiece, initiating a secure link to the Illuminati's hidden conference room. Pepper, Maria, Charles, Reed, he announced as his holographic avatar flickered into view. You've all seen Fury's data. We're outgunned if we don't act together. Our only real ace is Ethan, formerly known as Luther, and he's the best shot we've got at a direct engagement. The rest of us will be overwhelmed. Across the globe, the pieces were in motion. For the first time since its inception, the Security Council acknowledged the Hydra threat as a global crisis, and the Illuminati, along with S.H.I.E.L.D., prepared to face it head-on, united by one grim truth. Hydra was back, and the world would never be the same. Tony Stark's ambition for greater power, and the allies to wield it, had never been stronger. He'd identified the 5 largest mobile weapons suppliers on the planet as the only partners capable of tipping the balance, so formidable that even Hydra would think twice before opposing them. To drive home the stakes, Ethan released the leaked footage of Hydra's brazen assault on the Illuminati prison. But this wasn't an act of charity. It was a calculated marketing move. The product he was advertising was none other than lizard serum. Once the video went public, it ignited an uproar across every shadowy corner of the underworld. Not everyone was fooled by Hydra's theatrics. One of the first to see the real opportunity was Wilson Fisk, the kingpin himself. He issued a public challenge. I want 1 dose of that lizard serum. Whoever delivers it to me will earn 5% of New York City's annual narcotics revenue, roughly $100 million a year. Fisk's bold bid electrified the criminal community and even caught Ethan off guard. He'd never imagined the Kingpin would start an auction before the product officially hit the market. Yet it made perfect sense. Lizard serum promised enhancements beyond anything seen before. Recipients would gain strength surpassing even Captain America's peak, and their reptilian scales would deflect bullets from high-caliber automatic weapons. As rival factions scrambled to stake their claims, it was clear we'd crossed a threshold. The race for lizard serum had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The lizard serum's regenerative power was nothing short of astounding. When Dr. Connors's shattered palm reknit itself before their eyes, bone reforming, tissue knitting back together at a speed visible in real time, Ethan felt both awe and unease. Such a metabolism, he calculated, would carry a hidden cost. Repeated injuries would force cells into overdrive, effectively accelerating cellular aging. In time, every lizard man could face a progeria-like fate. Still, Ethan didn't hesitate to move forward. He planned to flood the market with the serum, pricing it so low that anyone could buy in. Why? Because chaos was the point. Let the world burn, he whispered to himself late at night. Tomorrow's headlines: Lizardmen rob a bank. He convinced himself this was more than selfish mischief. The real threat loomed far larger. Chitauri legions massing at the galactic gates, Thanos' armies poised to descend. Against those titans, what did Hydra or a few mutated reptiles matter? Earth's calm had become stagnation, a pond choked with complacency. Ethan saw himself as an orca in a school of drifting fish, stirring the water, awakening the sleeping masses to a new, savage vitality. He wasn't doing it for kicks. It was a grim preparation, and he trusted Master Gu Yi would understand the necessity of his vision. Hell's Kitchen. Ethan stared out over the wreckage of what New Yorkers contemptuously called the Wedge, a slum so desperately underfunded that the city didn't even bother collecting property taxes. With no revenue, the NYPD had all but abandoned these blocks. A body could lie on the sidewalk for hours before anyone bothered to respond. At night, they wouldn't come at all. Down here in the shadows, real power belonged to one man, Wilson Fisk, the crime lord everyone whispered about as the Kingpin. When rumors spread that Hydra, or some other sinister faction, had leaked a damning video, Fisk wasted no time demanding a countermeasure. He wanted the infamous lizard serum, the biochemical weapon he believed would restore his reputation and keep his underlings in line. Ethan watched through thick glass as the incubator hummed on Fisk's oak desk, the greenish fluid inside pulsing with life. He still couldn't wrap his head around how it arrived so quickly. He'd placed the order only the night before. By this evening, the package had appeared on his doorstep, untraceable, and the entire contents of his secret vault, not to mention a hefty sum from his offshore accounts, had vanished. He ran a hand through his dark hair and raised an eyebrow. Hydra? He muttered. voice low enough that only Fisk could hear. The Kingpin's gaze didn't flicker. "Does it matter?" Fisk replied, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a plume of smoke that curled toward the ceiling. "What matters is that it's here. We're not going to waste time asking questions." Ethan glanced back at the incubator and then at Fisk. The night was closing in, and the streets beyond those reinforced windows were alive with predators. In this corner of New York, power tipped the balance between life and death. And right now, whoever controlled the serum held the upper hand. Ethan squared his shoulders. He didn't know who'd beaten him to the delivery, Hydra, a rival syndicate, or someone else entirely, but he was determined to find out. Because in the wedge, every secret carried a price, and someone, somewhere, was about to pay. Chapter 169. Jin Bing, My Money. Jin Bing, the city's underworld kingpin, slammed his palm onto the desk. He was exactly $1 billion short, the precise value of the 10 vials of lizard serum still sitting in the crate before him. His chest tightened. This wasn't ordinary cash. It was money he'd just laundered through his network. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and reminded himself that money laundering came with a hefty fee. Normally, rivals paid 60%, but thanks to Jin Bing's political connections, several district councilors owed him favors, he'd negotiated it down to 50. Even so, he'd just taken a serious hit. He forced a wry smile. "It's fine," he muttered. "With these 10 vials, I'll make it back." He leaned forward, tapping the crate. Twice over, even. At least Hydra hadn't demanded half the drug profits. She'd originally slapped a sky-high price on the serum, yet when the deal closed, she'd delivered 10 bottles without question, and she'd done so with such stealth that Jin Bing hadn't even realized someone had slipped into his fortified office. He uncorked a vial and held it up to the light, the serum inside glowing faintly. A slow grin spread across his face. The real game, where fortunes were won and lost, was just beginning. Ethan shook off the thought. He wasn't at a disadvantage. Yes, a vial of lizard serum at $100 million was astronomical, but that was precisely the point, its rarity. He didn't have to worry about it becoming as common as compound number 1. When that formula first hit the market, it was a luxury. Now it was almost ubiquitous in New York, home to the world's wealthiest. Dubai might flaunt its excesses, but even its elites couldn't casually drop $100 million on experimental genetics. Elsewhere in Hell's Kitchen, a very different meeting was underway. Loan robbery? One ex-con spat, incredulous. A ragged group of freshly released inmates and battle-hardened veterans, men whose only real skill was violence, stared at the man addressing them. He spread his arms in a grand gesture. "Exactly. Hydra needs funds, and you're all in the same boat. Drowning in debt, unwilling to work an honest job, but eager to spend. What's one more score? You handle the targets, we take our cut. You're already accustomed to killing. Consider this a payday." The iron-masked man settled into his chair and offered them a thin smile. "Don't worry. We at Hydra will supply you with our latest lizard serum, and we'll even finance the operation. Consider it on the house." Around the table, a half-dozen mercenaries shifted in their seats. Each stood well over 2 meters tall, every sinew honed for combat, far from the pumped-up look of a gym rat. These were warriors in their prime. And when the name Hydra was spoken, even hardened prison inmates understood the gravity of the threat, the world's most ruthless terror network, operating with impunity on American soil. One of the men cleared his throat. "So what exactly do we get?" A short briefing video flickered to life on the screen behind the masked man. In it, a test subject injected the pale green serum. Within seconds, scales rippled across his arms and legs. His frame ballooned under a layer of super-dense, chitinous armor. He vaulted over rooftops as if propelled by jet thrusters, coming down hard enough to crack concrete, and all the while he shouldered a roaring Gatling gun. The footage ended with a single headline: "Irresistible firepower, unstoppable assault." The mercenaries exchanged looks. No police, no SWAT team, no National Guard could stand against a walking fortress armed like that. They were used to danger, but this was on a whole different level. Finally, one of them spoke, voice tight with anticipation. "All right, we're in. What's the target?" With Hydra's operations escalating, and the recent prison assault still fresh in everyone's minds, America now faces an unprecedented wave of riots, protests, and demonstrations sparked by one superpowered terrorist attack after another. The nation's elite worry they've lost their grip on public order. Ordinary police officers and SWAT teams simply aren't equipped to handle unstoppable superhumans, mutants, and fanatical terror cells. To restore control and reassure Washington's power brokers, the U.S. military has deployed a full battalion of the Rapidly Deployable Joint Task Force, supported by Air Force units, to New York City. They've brought a formidable arsenal of heavy firepower, including Humvees and Stryker armored vehicles. Since standard small arms won't deter those with super abilities, each Stryker is outfitted with an unmanned MCT-30 turret. Its high-rate machine gun fires armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds capable of burrowing through 110 millimeters of steel, enough to level the playing field against virtually any threat. They'd even been granted authorization to summon 3 squadrons of armed helicopters, gunships so powerful that once their belts were emptied, they could level every building across 5 or 6 city blocks. Without reinforced defenses, nothing could withstand that kind of barrage. Ethan had predicted this exact response, but refused to be fazed. To him, it was little more than a show of force. The invisible elites struck down by the Hydra attack weren't merely wealthy, they held controlling shares in the nation's largest conglomerates. Cross-ownership was the norm here, binding these corporate giants together in a web as tangled as the roots of an ancient oak. These were the true rulers of America. No sooner had the first discreet tycoon fallen than the country's war machine roared into action. Each subsequent strike felt like a slap in the face, one that propelled America's institutions into unprecedented overdrive. Unhampered by interagency rivalries, the FBI, CIA, and other privileged intelligence arms unleashed a ferocity that sent shockwaves through every corridor of power. After all, in this land you could assassinate a president, but the men of Wall Street? They remained untouchable. Ethan watched in silence as Iron Mask laid out the deal, his voice cold and measured. "Let me be perfectly clear," Iron Mask said, scanning the assembled men like a pack of desperate scavengers. "High risk demands high reward. We're taking a chance on you, so you're going to have to pay us back $100 million each once you're injected with the lizard serum. On top of that, you'll owe us $10,000 in interest every month. You have exactly 2 years to settle the full amount. If you don't think you can pull it off, walk away now. But if you agree, and then fail," he let the threat hang in the air. "You all know what happens next." A heavy silence fell over the room. None of the men needed the promise spelled out. The alternative was far more terrifying than a mountain of debt. Then a tall, gaunt figure stirred. He looked like a skeleton draped in orange hair and a tangled red beard. His sallow skin clung to his cheekbones, and his eyes were sunken deep into their sockets. When he spoke, his voice quivered with a mix of dread and fierce determination. "I'm in," he said. "My body's a ruin. PTSD, addiction, the whole works. I've been chasing relief through drugs ever since I left the field, and look at me now. Nothing works anymore, except maybe this serum. And I need the money. Fast." Ethan glanced at the man, then back at Iron Mask. It was exactly as the masked figure had said. No one here had much choice left. Yet acceptance hung heavy in the air, sealing their fates before the first injection had even begun. For Ethan, there really was no second chance in America, especially for someone from the middle or lower classes. That meant only one thing: rob him. Chapter 170, Lizardman Attack. Ethan drove the syringe into his arm and braced himself. Almost instantly, a roaring heat spread through his veins. The weight of his armor and weapons, once a constant burden, felt impossibly light. He strode the length of the lab in a dozen confident steps, flexing his fingers and marveling at the power coiling in his muscles. His uniform seemed strained as sinew rewove itself into denser, stronger fibers. Every breath came easier. Every movement felt supercharged. Ethan's eyes gleamed. "My body, it's fully recovered." Behind the observation window, Sergeant Gore, Corporal Goyle, and Private Gower stared in disbelief. They'd hesitated before, wary of the serum's side effects. But seeing Ethan's miraculous transformation erased every doubt. Who wouldn't want a body like that? Gore snatched a spare syringe from the bench. Goyle followed, then Gower, their hearts pounding, One by one, they injected themselves. At first, nothing happened. Then nausea ripped through Gower's stomach. He doubled over, clutching his gut, expecting to be sick. Instead, his clothes split at the seams. He shot upward as his arms and legs lengthened, his frame swelling with muscle. Within seconds, he stood 2 meters tall, covered head to toe in slick emerald scales, claws curving at his fingertips. A terrible roar echoed off the walls. Even having studied mutation footage, none of them were prepared for a living lizard man to materialize before their eyes. Goyle staggered backward in horror. Gore darted to the far wall, eyes wide at Gower's jagged claws and reptilian snarl. Then Gower attacked. With a thunderous swipe, he shattered the control panel. Sparks flew and alarms blared as wires sparked. Gore screamed and dove out of the way. Goyle's weapon clattered to the floor. Only Ethan kept his wits. He sidestepped the next swipe, tackled Gower around the waist, and slammed him to the ground. Gower thrashed, tail smashing a metal cabinet, sending tools flying. His alien strength pinned Ethan beneath a crushing weight. Still, Ethan forced his arms free and jammed a tranquilizer gun against Gower's scaled flank. 2 shots, then the lizardman's struggles slowed, his tail slackened, his breathing evening out. Ethan rolled off and knelt beside him, heart hammering. Gore and Goyle crept closer, hands trembling. "Is he all right?" Gore whispered. Ethan pressed a palm to Gower's armored chest. The rise and fall of his sides had softened but remained steady. He's stabilizing. The serum's volatility spikes during mutation, but once he recovers, he'll be stronger than ever. Goyle picked up Gower's rifle, too stunned to speak. Gore merely nodded, pale. Ethan stood and surveyed the destruction. Broken consoles, toppled cabinets, flashing red lights. He tapped his comm unit. "Base, this is Phoenix Team. We've got a Level 2 mutation under control. Send medical and security, and prep a secondary containment lab. We're not done yet." As alarms wailed around them, Ethan knew that tonight's experiment had just opened the door to far greater dangers, and far greater power. The lizard serum had claimed its first victims and its first champions. Iron Mask gave Goyle a steady clap on the shoulder and grinned. "Relax, Goyle. You're in control. This is your instinct." Goyle bowed his head and let the serum's effects wash over him. Scales receded, limbs contracted, and within moments he stood before the group in his human form, completely naked. Not for a second did he blush. As a veteran used to communal baths, public exposure was nothing new. Silently, one by one, the others stepped forward, rolled up their sleeves, and held out their arms. Compared to the hunger and hopelessness they'd known, a little nudity was no humiliation at all. Each of them took their shot of Kingpin's lizard serum. This small gathering at Iron Mask's hideout was only the tip of the iceberg. Across New York, hundreds had already embraced the transformation, and nationwide, tens of thousands more were lining up for their turn. As soon as Kingpin unleashed the serum on the streets, its price collapsed. The flood of new lizard folk outstripped even his expectations. Yet Ethan had no choice but to keep up with demand. In the days that followed, New York took on a peculiar new rhythm. Neon-lit alleyways, subway platforms, and shadowy rooftops all became hunting grounds for men and women, half reptile, half human. Where once the city pulsed with ordinary life, now emerald scales glimmered under every street lamp. New York was changing, and there was no turning back. No, lizard men are robbing banks. There's a squad of them hitting a branch in Brooklyn, and now they've just stormed the Queens Bank. Across New York City, officers stared at their radios in disbelief. The NYPD simply wasn't equipped to deal with this new breed of criminal. Each lizardman raider was clad head to toe in heavy Hydra-issued armor, thick plating over the torso, and a reinforced alloy helmet. Slung across their scaled backs were custom 14.5mm automatic rifles feeding from drum magazines. Thanks to quick-swap barrels, they could maintain a blistering rate of fire without overheating. Most of these lizardmen were former soldiers or terminally ill patients with nothing left to lose. Armed with full-power rounds and military-grade gear, they made short work of any resistance. Patrol officers and even SWAT teams found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered, their vehicles riddled with bullets or blasted to pieces. As aftershocks of gunfire echoed through the boroughs, New York descended into chaos, powerless to stop the most formidable bank robbers the city had ever seen. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath before the newly formed Anti-Super-Terrorism Task Force rolled onto the scene. Stryker armored vehicles thundered down the main avenue, their treads kicking up dust and debris. As the reinforced battalion disembarked, hundreds of soldiers fell into precise tactical formations and unleashed a withering barrage on the lizard folk. This wasn't a police raid. It was a full-scale military operation. Every weapon in the U.S. arsenal was on display. Automatic rifles, light and heavy machine guns, fragmentation grenades, rocket launchers, and even tanks and artillery units loitering just beyond the skyline. Under that hail of steel and explosives, the lizardmen had no choice but to scatter. Ethan knew that no other force, even one twice this size, could have held their ground. American soldiers rely on overwhelming firepower, identify, isolate, and annihilate every threat. And tonight, the brass in Washington wanted to make a statement. They were angry, and they intended to bring down the thunder on anyone who dared show their teeth, no matter what heavy weapons they'd smuggled into New York. Collateral damage? A shattered building or two was nothing. Rebuilding the city after a firefight of this scale was expensive, sure, but never impossible, so long as the money was there. Tonight, Ethan thought, they'd spent every last cent to prove a point. When America decides to fight super terrorists, it brings the full weight of its military might. Ethan could always requisition a little extra funding from his junior officers, but he knew the real reason the lizardmen had stayed in the fight: their absurdly overbuilt armor. Each of them wore 50mm thick plates, actual main battle tank armor, not just reactive modules. As a result, small-caliber assault rifles simply bounced off, and even light machine gun fire barely scratched their defenses. In theory, metal fatigue can set in, but how many rounds would it take to wear down a solid 50mm slab of tank steel? And thanks to the lizardmen's superhuman strength, the recoil of a light machine gun fired at point-blank range was practically painless. Of course, Ethan couldn't just hand these creatures the lizard serum and send them loose. If he did, they'd be effectively immortal, and no force on Earth could stop them. Ideally, he'd issue them heavy-duty body armor and load them up with proper weaponry, turning them into unstoppable shock troops. But in reality, with the full weight of the U.S. military at the problem, it wouldn't take more than a week to wipe out a few hundred lizardmen, armor plates or no. Ethan studied the dank network of tunnels beneath New York City and allowed himself a faint smile. This was America's domain, a place where every inch of ground had been fought over, every alleyway mapped, every sewer grate secured. Unlike the wide-open deserts of Afghanistan or the makeshift hideouts in Iraq, here, the labyrinth of old municipal drains offered them an unbeatable advantage, perfect cover for guerrilla and tunnel warfare. Hydra's tactical advisor had walked them through the plan in painstaking detail. The city's subterranean arteries were centuries old, endlessly branching and rerouting. Even the original engineers, if resurrected, wouldn't recognize half of these passages. Once the lizardmen had looted a bank, or 5, they could vanish into the sewers and force the American military to chase shadows. Heavy armor and artillery couldn't follow, and blowing up the entire drainage system would risk flooding the city above. No matter how cornered they seemed, they could slip away to rob another payroll or hold an entire platoon at bay. Still, when the anti-super-terrorist unit rolled in with shoulder-fired rockets and rapid-fire grenade launchers, Ethan felt a pang of respect. "Just like our instructor said," he muttered, "their firepower's on another level. Our rifles won't cut it." The lizardmen exchanged determined looks. If they wanted to win this underground war, they'd have to get their hands on something far more devastating. Ethan watched in stunned silence as the lizardmen pried open the oversized crate. Inside lay a hefty M60 squad machine gun, its feeding tray already loaded with a 500-round belt of armor-piercing shells, a grim testament to their firepower. But that wasn't all. Each warrior carried 2 additional ammo belts slung across his chest, 20 high-explosive grenades secured to his belt, and a single-operator anti-tank launcher slung over his shoulder. Chapter 171, Big Event. Ethan's squad had just pinned down the lizard men with sustained fire when the first of them struck back, and in the blink of an eye, a fellow trooper at the suppression line was literally ripped apart. The attackers weren't using pistols or submachine guns, but M60 belt-fed machine guns loaded with armor-piercing rounds, each round capable of slicing off a third of a man's torso. Hollywood's bullet cavity effects are downright quaint compared to the real thing. Even more terrifying, several of the lizard men hefted ammunition boxes strapped across their backs. Belts of 12.7mm rounds fed directly into M2 Browning heavy machine guns, vehicle-mount weapons usually reserved for tanks, armored personnel carriers, or fortified fire bases. These behemoths exist to punch through light armor, wipe out infantry in the open, and even deter low-altitude aircraft. Under that withering hail, Ethan knew they had no cover and no time to regroup. The reptilian force's counterattack was so brutal, so shockingly swift, that the elite anti-terror unit didn't even have a chance to react. In seconds, dozens of soldiers were cut down, their bodies strewn across the dusty compound. Ethan ducked behind a shattered concrete wall, heart pounding, as the M2's thunderous roar cut through the chaos, and he realized this was only the beginning of the big event unfolding around them. Their bodies lay in a mangled heap, twisted flesh and smeared blood that even dog tags could not sort into names. The strikers' remote-controlled turrets unleashed a hail of machine gun fire, catching the lizard men off guard. Most of them crumpled to the ground, but not one of them lay dead. Their armored vests, plated front and back, had taken the brunt of the assault. Though the strikers' 110mm rounds could punch through standard military armor, once they'd shattered 50mm of scale plating, their remaining force simply tore cavities through muscle and organs. To a lizardman, whose natural healing was superb, those shots were like body blows from a heavyweight boxer, agonizing, but non-lethal, provided the head stayed intact. "Damn it," one of them hissed through clenched jaws. They realized at once that these vehicles were no ordinary threat. "Warhead," another snarled, using their code names to shield real identities. The lizard man known as Warhead hefted his weapon, the Javelin anti-tank missile. By human standards, it was a huge, unwieldy launcher, but to these reptilian warriors it was just another tool in their war chest. With a guttural cry, Warhead locked on, ready to fire the shot that might turn the tide against the armored giant before them. Chapter 5. Fire in the Streets. Ethan crouched behind a shattered stone planter, his breath ragged in his lungs. Across the ruined courtyard, the lizardmen were zeroing in on a U.S. Army Stryker armored vehicle. With reptilian precision, they activated dive attack mode and unleashed the Javelin missile. The launcher's guidance system sprang to life, picking up the missile's infrared signature, wavelengths invisible to the naked eye. Seconds later, the weapon adjusted its flight path and attitude, hurtling downward toward its target in a deadly arc. A fierce tail flame roared behind it, painting the sky orange and white. Ethan knew that Javelin missiles were fearsome enough from the front, but their exhaust was no joke to anyone standing behind. The nozzles angled 30 degrees left and right, spraying hot gases across a danger zone nearly 26 meters long. Any soldier or creature stuck in that zone would be scorched or outright immobilized. The lizardmen, too, were caught off guard. They couldn't move fast enough to escape the rocket's backblast. Before they could react, the missile screamed in, striking the striker's roof with a thunderous blast. Boom, boom! The concussions rattled every window in the neighborhood. Concrete cracked, dust billowed, and a fireball blossomed at ground zero. Ethan slammed his back against the planter, covering his ears as the shock waves rolled outward. Across the street, terrified residents tumbled from their apartments, clutching children and pets. Fenwick Street had never seen anything like this. As Americans born and bred in New York City, they'd braced for blackouts, storms, even earthquakes, but never war, and certainly never this kind of battlefield fury unleashed in the very heart of their home. Ethan's heart pounded. The war had come to New York, and there was no turning back. The lizardmen never intended to start a war with the United States. They simply came to rob the bank. As soon as they cracked the vault, they made their getaway. They'd even stashed a 50-kilogram bomb by the security door, ready to blow it open if anything went wrong. Every detail of the operation had been planned around the sewer system. They chose a bank with a nearby access point and smuggled in their ammunition through the underground tunnels. When the alarm finally rang out, They unleashed a hail of bullets. Within minutes, they disabled a striker-armored vehicle and left dozens of soldiers dead. On paper, the tally didn't look staggering, but the psychological impact was immense. For the first time in living memory, Americans felt their status as global hegemon and world police had been challenged. In New York, thousands took to the streets in protest. Others packed up their lives, determined to retreat to distant farms rather than risk another outbreak of violence. Now, as panic spreads, many fear that unless the federal government can resolve this crisis quickly, the city's descent into chaos will only accelerate. And somewhere in the shadows, Ethan, determined, focused, and outnumbered, knows the real battle has only just begun. Ethan watched the celebration unfold on the grainy TV feed, the roar of triumph from the others echoing off the concrete walls behind him. In the cramped back room of their makeshift hideout, lizard folk fighters rifled through stacks of cash and securities. "We hit over 40 million this haul," one of them crowed, slapping a greasy fist against the table. "Ha! At this rate, we'll have Hydra's loan paid off in no time," another laughed, tearing open a new bundle of $100 bills. "Don't get cocky," a third chimed in. "We've got fierce competition out there. Banks all over the city are getting hit." Ethan's yellow eyes never wavered from the flickering screen. He had every reason to be pleased. They'd pulled off a spectacular score today, but part of him remained on edge. Even with Hydra's elite weaponry and tactical intelligence behind them, their ranks had taken hits. Not everyone here was a hardened soldier. Most were driven by desperation, not professional training. The official reports boasted a 9 in 10 success rate for heists like theirs, and Ethan privately knew how inflated that figure was. As more of the city's big banks collapsed under these coordinated strikes, he should have relished the chaos. Instead, he felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Fewer banks meant fewer targets, and he had no wish to see more of his teammates fall in the line of fire. He glanced at the tally Hydra's data analysts had compiled, the total number of competing cells in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, more than enough to turn every banker in New York into a hermit. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, switching off the set. He turned to glare at one of the younger lizards, whose glee over a freshly printed roll of bills made Ethan's skin crawl. "How many teams did Hydra deploy today?" The teenager froze, count falling from 52 to 51 as he realized Ethan was serious. Around them, the rowdy laughter died down. Even in victory, Ethan's presence reminded them all of the blood price they'd paid, and would pay again. He stepped away from the table, pulling his hood a little lower. Around him, the clinking of coins and rustle of bills resumed, but the celebration felt muted now, an uneasy prelude to whatever came next. Because in this city, the bigger the score, the steeper the next climb. And Ethan knew Hydra wasn't the only predator circling the banks of New York. Ethan stared at the flickering TV screen in disbelief. At first, he'd assumed his crew was the only one hitting banks, but tonight's news reported that hundreds of banks across New York had been robbed in a single day. "Are there really that many banks in this city?" he muttered. And it wasn't just banks. The broadcast even showed footage of other lizardmen, reckless, inexperienced, smashing display cases in jewelry stores. Those jobs were easy to pull off, but nearly impossible to fence. Meanwhile, the Federation had scrambled its anti-super-terrorism forces into dozens of detachments, hoping to cover every crime scene, yet even reinforced battalions proved no match for the lizardmen. High Command had believed their manpower more than sufficient, but the losses were staggering. A few dozen soldiers killed here, a handful there. By day's end, an entire battalion lay in ruins. Ethan's scales tingled with unease. "We can't stay," he said. "New York's too hot now. With Iron Man, Emperor, and the Hulk prowling the streets, and the Federation sure to escalate, this place will turn into a death trap." The pack leader's cold eyes narrowed. "Then where do you suggest we go, Ethan?" Ethan met that gaze steadily. "South. Chicago or Detroit. Smaller cities, plenty of banks with real vaults, and far fewer heroes waiting to wreck our plans." Ethan frowned, glancing at the cracked sewer grate. "If there isn't a proper sewer line here, we'll be sitting ducks, won't we?" One of the lizardmen snorted, his scaly brow furrowing. "You're overthinking it. Any major U.S. city will have underground passages. We don't have to limit ourselves to New York. Los Angeles works just as well. Tons of banks, and the tunnels underneath are even more expansive. Another lizardman nodded in agreement. Besides, we've stirred up too much commotion here already. It's smarter to pick up our things and move on before more humans catch on. Chapter 172. The Interview. Only a handful of the lizardmen chose to slip away under cover of darkness. Disguised in human form, they were nearly impossible to detect, as long as they kept their heads down and didn't draw attention to themselves. America's strict privacy laws worked in their favor. Surveillance cameras were confined mostly to highways and store entrances, leaving entire city blocks unmonitored. When the heat got too intense, they simply vanished into the sewers, shed their human guises, and reemerged undiscovered on the other side. But the American government wouldn't stand for it. Outraged by the brazen robberies, complete with firearms, artillery, and even casualties among U.S. soldiers, it declared martial law in the hardest-hit districts. Never before had the military been deployed on domestic soil with such authority, not even during the height of the $0 riots. Those incidents were mere vandalism and looting by desperate crowds. This was a coordinated invasion. Ethan leaned back in his chair, clicking his tongue. Given the scale of the threat, militarizing the response was unavoidable. He'd just come from a classified briefing with Joint Chiefs of Staff, and in a few hours he would face a panel of military interviewers on live broadcast. The Pentagon wanted every angle, how the lizardmen bypassed security, where they'd go next, and, most pressing of all, how to stop them. An aide tapped on the door. "Colonel Mason is ready for you, sir." Ethan straightened his jacket and headed down the corridor. Behind him, the city's skyline glowed with an uneasy calm. Tonight, the nation would hear from him, one of the few people who truly understood the enemy that lurked beneath their streets. And whatever came next, he intended to make sure America was ready. Chapter 12. This interview wasn't arranged because they'd discovered that Ethan was Black Caesar. The real reason was that the U.S. military was growing alarmed over Hydra's reckless distribution of the lizardman serum. They'd seen with their own eyes how devastating the lizardmen had become. In close-quarters urban combat, one lizardman could mow down hundreds of unprepared soldiers. Only superior modern firepower had prevented a complete massacre. Television screens around the world carried the same grim headlines. "New York is a war zone. Our troops are no match for these monsters." Protesters chanted in the streets, "Why are we still here? Where's the mayor? Ah, yes, he's vacationing at his private estate. If he can flee, so can we. Let New York fall." Meanwhile, Wall Street executives sneered that the rule of law was a joke. After all, who really held the power in America's financial capital? Certainly not the mayor. That's why the Pentagon had dispatched a delegation to Hydra headquarters. They wanted answers, fast. And they wanted to see Ethan in person. The press room in Hydra's New York facility was cavernous, wired for satellite broadcasts. Journalists from all over the globe filled the rows of seats, cameras clicking and lenses trained on the stage. At the front, two high-ranking Hydra officers sat flanking an empty podium. A hush fell over the crowd as General Anders, the lead U.S. representative, rose to speak. "We're here under orders from the Joint Chiefs of Staff," he announced, voice steady. "The situation in New York is spiraling out of control. Hydra's lizardmen are too powerful. We need to know what's being done to contain them, and what you intend to do next." A murmur rippled through the audience. Hydra's spokesperson, Colonel Richter, leaned forward. "General Anders, Hudson Valley operations are ongoing. The serum is tightly controlled. We've deployed strikes against rogue units." "Don't mince words," the general interrupted. "Your tightly controlled serum is freeing lizardmen across the city. New York is burning. Americans are dying." At that moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall swung open. Heads turned as Ethan strode in, tall, assured, wearing the black leather jacket that had become his trademark. Cameras flashed. Reporters dropped their pens. Ethan climbed the stage with calm precision. He paused, surveying the room. Then he nodded to Colonel Richter, who stepped aside. General Anders stood to greet him. "Mr. Black Caesar, excuse me. Mr. Ethan, thank you for coming." Ethan gave a thin smile. "Let's get one thing straight. I'm not your enemy. I want New York secured as much as you do. But if you think lizardmen are the only threat, you're sorely mistaken." A reporter blurted out, "Then what is Mr. Ethan?" He turned to face the cameras, every microphone pointed at him. Hydra didn't unleash monsters on this city by accident. This was a deliberate escalation, and we'll get to the root of it. But first, you need to stop calling them monsters. They're soldiers, just as much as anyone in uniform. And until you respect that, you'll never win the war for New York. The room exploded with questions. As Ethan raised a hand for silence, the world waited on his next words, and on Hydra's plan to save the city from the very forces it had helped create. Ethan sat across from Lieutenant General Alvin Hogg in the dimly lit conference room, the hum of the building's air handling system the only sound between them. Hogg, the U.S. Army's plenipotentiary for this arms negotiation, fixed him with a steely gaze. "Ethan," Hogg began, his tone clipped, "you've no doubt heard about the catastrophe in New York yesterday." Ethan nodded gravely. "I have. It was devastating, and it really makes me question the Federation's readiness." His blunt assessment seemed to irritate the general. Hogg's jaw clenched for a moment before he spoke again. "Mr. Carter, I'm here precisely because of those shortcomings." Ethan knew Hogg wouldn't let personal discomfort sway him. This was a man accustomed to orchestrating multi-billion-dollar arms deals and maintaining an off-the-books bank account reputed to hold over $1 billion. Even a lifetime in uniform couldn't explain such riches, a fact Ethan had learned from his informant, Galvatron. Still, there was no time for moralizing. The mission came first. Hogg reached across the polished table and slid a sealed dossier toward Ethan. Inside, you'll find the full technical specs on the new weapon systems and critical intelligence that's been withheld from your government. Ethan opened the dossier. High-resolution satellite images, schematic diagrams, deployment coordinates, everything he'd been missing. He let his eyes scan the pages before looking up, astonished. This changes everything," he said quietly. For the first time, Hogg's severity softened into a tight smile. "Then we need to act fast. The Federation grows more vulnerable with every passing hour." Ethan tapped the dossier. "Agreed. Let's finalize our terms." Hogg leaned back, the faintest glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "I'll arrange shipment of the prototype to your facility within the week." Ethan closed the file and met the general's gaze. "I'll brief my superiors immediately." "Thank you, General." Hogg offered a curt nod. "Don't thank me yet. This is only the beginning." They stood simultaneously, their silhouettes stretched by the late afternoon sun filtering through the blinds. Beyond the glass, New York's skyline lay silent, a stark reminder of why they were here and how much was at stake. "Ethan." Lieutenant General Alvin drew a distinctive blue envelope from his inner pocket. Ethan didn't need to be told what was inside. "Mission?" Ethan gave a wry smile. "That's a loaded word, General." Alvin's expression remained unreadable as he tilted the envelope toward Ethan. "This came straight from the president. His signature is right here." But Ethan was already shaking his head. He knew that this was as much a matter of secrecy as it was of authority. The paper itself conveyed nothing beyond the president's mark. "Save it," Ethan said softly. "We both know the president here is largely a figurehead. Legally, this piece of paper carries little more weight than a business card." He stopped himself, then added with a self-deprecating chuckle, "But I suppose I shouldn't start quoting the law to a soldier of your caliber." Alvin let out a low laugh that could have been amusement or impatience. "Go on, Mr. Harper. If you're going to make a pitch, I'd rather hear it now." Ethan nodded and leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "With the lizardmen stirring up trouble along our southern flank and Hydra regrouping in the east, we need something beyond conventional infantry. We need super soldiers." Alvin's eyes narrowed as he repeated the phrase. "Super soldiers. Not compound number 1, though." "Exactly," Ethan said, relief flickering in his gaze. "We're talking about a new solution, something reliable, controllable, and lethal." He paused, waiting for Alvin's verdict. The general tapped the blue envelope against his palm, weighing the promise behind Ethan's words as much as the signature on the outside. They wanted something far more potent, compound number 2. This formula functions as the ultimate super bodyguard injection. The only way to kill someone enhanced by it is to strike the brain. Any other injury simply regenerates, much like a lizard's tail, only without leaving behind gruesome scars. Compound Num 2 was actually a byproduct of Ethan's own research into Kryptonians. It doesn't contain any alien DNA. Ethan merely identified human cellular factors that, when amplified, deliver extraordinary strength and resilience. In raw power, it ranks at the S level you'd see in a blockbuster like The Witch. Of course, Ethan had intentionally locked down the formula's mutation triggers before dosing his super bodyguards. But luck isn't guaranteed. In universes like Marvel and DC, mutation rates run far higher than in ours. The underprivileged often depend on random mutation to gain power, while the wealthy buy it through technology. A single vial of super soldier serum can spin off hundreds of different outcomes. Heroic champions one minute, ruthless villains the next. And Ethan isn't exaggerating. Most of the world's superheroes and supervillains can trace their origins back to experiments on the super soldier serum, first pioneered for Captain America by the U.S. military and then copied, modified, or reinvented by rival agencies around the globe. Despite all these breakthroughs, there are still a few genetic gifts no one's managed to unlock: true telekinesis and absolute immortality. In one blockbuster film, the heroine's sister demonstrates a power so extreme that even decapitation can't kill her. Experts suspect some form of cellular or even molecular regeneration, a feat Ethan quietly replicated in his own work. Ethan's super bodyguards performed spectacularly in field tests too. Deployed en masse, they withstood wave after wave of enhanced Hydra agents, a feat that set a new record for sheer defensive endurance. At one point, Ethan had intended to roll this success out on a global scale. Now, he's lost any real desire to push forward. He's adopted a kind of detached, almost Buddhist attitude. If he can grow stronger without lifting a finger, why grind himself to the bone? He'd much rather sit back and enjoy life. Still, the military brass can't help but lust after Ethan's latest creation, known only as Compound Number 2. The problem is cost. Even the earlier formula, Compound Number 1, came with a $10 million price tag per dose, already prohibitive for large-scale manufacture. No matter how potent Number 2 might be, its sticker price makes mass deployment all but impossible. And for now, that's exactly where things stand. Chapter 173, Military Necessities. The United States pours staggering sums into its defense budget every year, but those line items on the public ledger tell only part of the story. Hidden behind closed doors, massive consortiums funnel private funds to supplement the official expenditure, and that extra price tag still leaves everyone wincing. After all, if another crisis like this one crops up, Washington would probably just send in bombers and fighters as a first response. From their point of view, even a surefire victory isn't worth that kind of wallet burn. They'd rather keep Ethan on ice. And then there's Iron Man. At least Tony Stark fronts the costs himself and even picks up the tab for any collateral damage. Ethan suspects the government and its corporate backers secretly relish the chaos. They've got so much money stashed away, they're practically begging for danger. Ethan doesn't mind watching cash go up in flames, but when it comes to reimbursing them for destruction he didn't cause, that's where he draws the line. A compensation invoice? Let them send one. He'd toss it unread. Yet the recent Lizard Man onslaught shattered their complacency. It's one thing to crunch numbers in a budget meeting, it's another to see entire city blocks reduced to rubble. The harsh truth is now undeniable. When threats of that magnitude loom, you need more than bombs and fighters. You need people like Iron Man, and you need Ethan. Priceless, no matter the cost. Norman let out a quiet sigh of relief. No one suspected that the so-called lizard serum was an Osborn Industries creation. If they had, they'd be knocking down our doors to order it in bulk, literally giving us a taste of our own medicine. He offered himself a small, wry smile. Destroying the last of the serum and handing its remnants off to Ethan had been the smartest move he'd made in months. Otherwise, who knew how he'd be held accountable once the truth came out? Seated across from him, Ethan shook his head. We can't mass-produce Compound 2 yet. Our unit costs are still too high, and we haven't even recouped our research expenses on Compound 1. Until we've fully exploited Compound 1's market value, jumping into Compound 2 wouldn't make financial sense. Lieutenant General Irwin, who'd been listening in silence, allowed himself a knowing glance. After decades of military procurement, he'd learned how these corporate minds worked. First, they bleeding-edge prototypes through the bidding process, selling off imperfect versions at a premium. Only once they'd milked every dollar from those early models would they unleash the finished product, and then watch the profits roll in. By then, we'd already developed far more advanced prototypes. "Money isn't an issue, Ethan," Lieutenant General Irwin said without hesitation. "I've identified a target, and we can dedicate $10 billion a year in military spending to equip our forces. For the United States, one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful nations, that kind of outlay is almost routine. In the new fiscal year, the Defense Department's budget climbed to $886 billion, just shy of $900 billion. To put that in perspective, it amounts to nearly 20% of total federal revenues. Of that massive sum, only $24 to $26 billion is set aside for shipbuilding each year, just under 3% of the total defense budget. The rest is parceled out across a complex web of programs and services. As one of the military's principal branches, the Navy alone receives roughly a third of the entire budget, about $300 billion. Ethan knew that maintenance alone would swallow a fortune, and that didn't even count the procurement costs, so he had no idea how much practical value would come from this $300 billion budget. What he did know was that Washington was now proposing to dedicate $10 billion of its annual defense budget in partnership with Imperial Industries. Their prize? Compound number 2. Ethan suspected that the real allocation might be even higher. Once the Pentagon began its internal accounting, $10 billion could easily balloon to $15 billion or even $50 billion. Yet from a military standpoint, compound number 2 was precisely what they needed. True, its brute strength didn't match that of the so-called lizard soldiers, but its superior speed would allow it to outmaneuver and utterly demolish them in the field. And, Lieutenant General Irwin added, we want a high-profile American subject, someone like Mr. Ethan, to represent the program. Budget constraints won't be an issue. I'm prepared to authorize that full $10 billion for your direct oversight. It sounded outrageous. $10 billion to create a single super soldier and turn him into America's emblematic champion. But after witnessing Ethan's jaw-dropping feats of power and speed, even the Pentagon brass believed they'd gotten an incredible bargain. Ethan's expression stayed as unreadable as ever. He found a certain thrill in engineering a new homeland for America, but that particular amusement would have to wait. After all, revealing too much now would spoil the fun. The so-called Homelander incident had been one of his carefully staged diversions, designed both to entertain himself and to prod the Illuminati's initiative to bolster S-Healed. Lieutenant General Irwin swallowed his impatience. Dr. Morgan, compound number 2 is exactly what we need. I'm afraid that's not possible, Ethan interrupted coolly. My research is strictly confidential, but if it's the effects of compound number 2 you're after, you don't actually need it. I can offer you a cellular reinforcement protocol that achieves even better results. Irwin forced a polite nod. He'd come for compound number 2 and planned to get it, one way or another, but he'd bite his tongue for now. And what does this protocol involve? Ethan leaned forward, eyes glinting. You've already secured both cadavers and live specimens of the lizard people for study, haven't you? I assume your team is dissecting their cellular structure even as we speak. Those words struck Irwin like a blow. Yes, the military had obtained several lizard people bodies, but no living ones. That gap in their research had hamstrung their progress. And if Ethan held the answer, well, suddenly this meeting had become a lot more interesting. Chapter 8. The ant serum word had spread fast. Iron Man had cornered a living lizard man amid the chaos, neutralized him, and hauled his body back for study. Whispers ran rampant that Ethan and Tony Stark were collaborating on whatever research lay ahead. Speculation even suggested they'd dissected the so-called lizard serum. In a spacious conference room at Emperor Industries' secure facility, Lieutenant General Alvin paced before Ethan. It must be lizard serum, he said, folding his arms. Reptiles mutate easily. Surely you've isolated their formula? Ethan shook his head, his expression patient. Reptile biology offers no real enhancement potential, he replied. What we're exploring is far more promising. With a sharp snap of his fingers, a circular hatch in the floor slid open, and a sleek metal console rose to command attention. Alvin's jaw dropped. He'd heard Emperor Industries had cutting-edge tech, but nothing prepared him for this. As holographic blueprints flickered to life above the console, magnified images of cells dividing, microscopic views of insect chitin, genetic sequences weaving across the air, he stared in awe. Ethan tapped the air, cycling through a virtual model that illustrated the serum's effects on human physiology. "We call it the ant serum," he announced. "Ant serum?" Alvin echoed, eyebrows arching. "Does it turn you into a giant ant like that lizard stuff?" Ethan smiled. "Not at all. Our goal isn't beastly transformation, but true human evolution. The so-called lizard serum was a crude detour, great for show, disastrous in practice. What this formula does is harness the remarkable strength, endurance, and regenerative capacity found in certain arthropods, then integrate those traits safely into human cells." He paused as the hologram shifted to show a test subject, an animated figure demonstrating leaps and feats of strength far beyond ordinary limits, while vital signs remained perfectly stable. Alvin watched, utterly spellbound. "This is the next step in human enhancement," Ethan said quietly. "Stronger muscles encoded at the molecular level, repair mechanisms that kick in seconds after injury, metabolic efficiency like you'd find in a colony of soldier ants, all without losing your humanity." Lieutenant General Alvin swallowed hard. The lizard serum had been nothing but a public spectacle. This, he realized, was something altogether more profound. Ethan turned off the projection and slid the console back into the floor. "Once we finalize the trials," he said, "we'll be ready to reshape what it means to be human." Alvin nodded, excitement and apprehension warring in his eyes. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was clear. The age of the ant serum had dawned, and the world would never be the same. "General, do you think this marks the evolution of a new human species?" Lieutenant General Alvin pressed, tilting his head expectantly. Ethan shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Not at all. If it were, I'd have to admit I'm reptilophobic." Alvin recoiled at the word, but recovered almost instantly. "Precisely. These so-called new humans are meant to be more beautiful, more perfect, an embodiment of our deepest desires. Nobody dreams of handsome lizard men. We want flawless symmetry, radiant skin." Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished table. "That's just it. This isn't a surface-level tweak. We're talking about potential genetic modifications that run deep, so subtle you won't see scales or hear hisses at first glance. They'll look entirely human until you delve into their DNA." Chapter 174, The Pact and the Iron Legion. Lieutenant General Alvin leaned back in his chair, eyebrows knitted in confusion. "Honestly, Ethan, I've no idea what you're talking about." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "I've been studying that decay rate equation from the lizard serum and cross-referencing it with arthropod physiology. The result was a blueprint for what I'm calling a super ant." "A super ant?" Alvin repeated, his brow arching higher. Ethan nodded. "Picture an insect with two skeletal systems, a rigid exoskeleton overlaying an internal bone structure. Layer on the prodigious muscle power of ants, and you get tremendous strength and durability." The lieutenant general frowned. "You're not actually turning people into ants, are you?" "Of course not," Ethan replied with a small smile. "Ant musculature and our human anatomy are fundamentally incompatible. You can't just splice those genes into us and expect to hoist a car single-handedly. Unless we throw out all of modern science, there's no easy shortcut to that kind of power." He paused, watching as Alvin absorbed the implications. The general's skepticism was expected, but Ethan was determined to change his mind. Ethan's statements were nothing more than a smokescreen, designed to misdirect American scientists with false leads and keep them busy for years, chasing the idea of grafting ant genes onto human DNA, possibly draining tens of billions of research dollars each year. Lieutenant General Irvine sat back and replayed the video of the so-called ant serum subject. In the footage, the soldier strode forward under a hail of AK-47 fire without so much as flinching, and then lifted a National Guard armored vehicle over his head as if it weighed nothing. The raw power and resilience on display made Irvine's eyes light up. "Our lizardmen rely on exoskeletal armor to shrug off rifle rounds," he murmured. "But these—" He paused the video on a close-up of unblemished skin, not a single scratch in sight. "Their muscles act like armor. No impact, no penetration." Is this a powered exoskeleton? Irvine wondered aloud, though he saw no external framework, only a soldier whose flesh seemed impervious to bullets. Ethan laid the X-ray films on the conference table and dimmed the overhead lights. Lieutenant General Alvin leaned forward, squinting at the ghostly images. As the beams cut through flesh and muscle, they revealed something astonishing. These super soldiers didn't have the familiar porous skeletons Alvin knew. Instead, their bones appeared as solid, uninterrupted masses. Human bones are naturally rigid, Ethan explained in a steady voice, but the ant serum infuses them, filling every cavity. The result is a nearly seamless framework that not only strengthens the bones, but also shields vital organs, even the skull, from harm. Alvin's eyes widened. No wonder an AK-47 round glanced off them without so much as a bruise. If the bones were this dense, each soldier must weigh as much as 2 average men. Of course, their joints still allowed movement. That's why you could flex an elbow or bend a knee. But on the X-ray, those hinges vanished. Everything looked like one monolithic structure. In truth, Ethan continued, tapping a finger on the film, they carry a hidden exoskeleton beneath the skin, layered over their natural bones. It's a dual skeleton system, one inside the other. The general sat back, rubbing his forehead. The implications were staggering. The ant serum, he realized, might be exactly what modern warfare demanded. He could see it now. Unbreakable lines of soldiers advancing without fear of bullets or shrapnel. Of course, Ethan added, the number 2 compound still has its uses, but against these enhanced troops, it simply can't compete. Alvin nodded thoughtfully. The battlefield had just changed forever, and with these super soldiers, he held the key to its future. Ethan's latest creation was nothing short of revolutionary, an ant-based serum that transformed ordinary soldiers into a specialized super unit, ideal for covert squads and stealth missions. Today, Lieutenant General Alvin had come to negotiate terms. "Mr. Ethan," Alvin began, "what's your price on this ant serum?" Ethan met his calm, expectant gaze. $100 million per batch. Alvin nodded, weighing the sum. Each batch would produce roughly 100 ant soldiers annually, an investment he clearly deemed worthwhile. Understood. I'll brief the president immediately. If we get the green light, I'll return with formal orders. You have my thanks, Ethan replied, extending his hand. They shook, and the general departed. As the door closed, Ethan's aide spoke up. Sir, he seemed in a hurry. Shall I propose our other enhancement lines? Dragonfly serum for agility, wasp serum for assault, beetle serum for defense. Ethan shook his head. Let them focus on ants. No matter how many super troops they field, they won't threaten the Illuminati, only the United States itself. And remember, the stronger we make ourselves, the stronger the enemies will attract. Elsewhere in the complex, Tony Stark was locked in another all-nighter. Since the lizard ambush, he'd scarcely slept, poring over schematics and data. Pepper Potts finally found him huddled in his private lab, eyes bloodshot. Tony, she said firmly, you can't keep vanishing like this. You need to step away before you burn out. He looked up, exhaustion etched on his face, but Pepper's concern was unmistakable and well-deserved. Ethan stared at the schematics on his holo display when Tony's voice interrupted him. What's going on with the company? Care to fill me in, honey? Tony tapped into the nanobot network, and data streams unfurled in midair. Actually, it's not exactly corporate business. Wait, did you build all these suits? Peppa turned, her eyes widening. The lab was lined with glass display cases, each housing a polished steel armor. After the lizard men attack, I realized we needed to arm ourselves en masse, she explained. But don't worry, these aren't for sale. They'll only be deployed on strike missions against the lizard men. Tony nodded thoughtfully. The Illuminati's 3 principal members, himself, Ethan, and Charles, were powerful, but manpower was desperately thin. Expanding the team required rigorous vetting and Ethan's approval. Suddenly, Tony's mind clicked into gear. What if we repurposed the old Mark prototypes as autonomous drones? Jarvis could control them, and we'd tie them into Angel's intelligence network for coordination. At that moment, Bruce Banner emerged from the next lab, running simulations across multiple screens. Tony seized the opportunity. Bruce, I want you on board for Project Ultron, a next-generation AI to oversee these drone suits and integrate them with Jarvis. Banner's face lit up. Count me in, he said, adjusting his glasses. Ethan exchanged a look with Tony. Between Peppa's armory, Jarvis's expanded reach, and Bruce's AI expertise, they were forging a new edge. If they played this right, the lizard men wouldn't know what hit them. Ethan politely declined Tony's offer to help him develop a cutting-edge artificial intelligence. He'd seen too many cautionary tales. Skynet loomed large in his mind. When Peppa learned his hesitation was tied to lizard people, she fell uncharacteristically quiet. No one could blame her. These so-called reptilians had already pulled off brazen bank and jewelry heists, and even staged a flashy sports car robbery. That last gang was caught only because the car's GPS betrayed them. Tony waved off the finger-wagging. "Look, the real problem is education," he said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. "Most convenience store clerks in this country can't do basic arithmetic without a calculator. We call it a liberal education, but it often means nobody learns much beyond the bare minimum. And our elites? Their children get top-tier schooling, while everyone else gets left behind. It's a built-in stranglehold. Once you're born on the wrong side of the tracks, you stay there." Ethan exchanged a glance with Peppa. She bit her lip, then shook her head. "That doesn't explain the lizard people," she murmured. "Maybe not," Tony admitted, tapping a folder on his desk. "But it does explain why no one saw them coming. I've been diving into every shred of data on reptilian physiology, genetic markers, thermal imaging signatures, you name it. My goal is to craft a detection system so precise we can unmask them from anywhere. No more risky stakeouts or undercover ops. If we can spot their cold-blooded signatures remotely, we'll know exactly where to strike." Ethan sighed. He still wasn't sold on Tony's plan, but he understood the urgency. As the world slept, these lizard people were already slipping through the cracks, and if Tony succeeded, they'd finally have a fighting chance. Based on Jarvis's assessment of the lizard people's combat capabilities, he could have sent the Iron Legion to wipe them out in minutes. But Tony Stark, ever hungry for the spotlight, refused to let his robots steal his thunder, especially when his own body was already running on fumes. Chapter 175, Villain Base. Deep in Siberia's frozen wasteland, known among locals as Vodka Country, stands a ramshackle wooden hut. Inside, dusty scientific instruments lie strewn about like fallen leaves, their wires snaking across the rough-hewn floorboards. Amid the clutter sits an old man in a threadbare coat, his shoulders stooped with years of regret and cold. This is Anton Vanko. Years ago, Anton was celebrated as one of the world's most brilliant physicists. He partnered with Howard Stark to create the prototype arc reactor, an invention destined to change the course of history. But when Stark learned that Anton had secretly sold advanced weaponry to terrorist organizations, their partnership ended in scandal. Branded a traitor by both his adopted allies and his homeland, Anton was exiled to Siberia, left to toil alone in the harshest corner of Vodka Country. His only companion is his son, Ivan Vanko. The young man's broad shoulders and powerful build speak of a lifetime spent battling the elements. Ivan's once dark hair hangs in unwashed tangles, and a ragged white vest clings to his torso, threadbare and grimy. Elaborate tattoos swirl across his skin, at first glance ominous markings of some clandestine cult. In truth, each symbol is a religious icon, etched into flesh as a testament to faith, family, and the unforgiving legacy his father has left him. Here, in this forgotten corner of the world, father and son plot the next stage of their destiny, one that will shake the foundations of power and echo far beyond the icy borders of Vodka Country. Ethan Vanko wasn't a religious man, but he yearned for some spiritual solace. Under his father Anton's tutelage, he graduated from the Moscow Engineering Physics Institute, one of Russia's foremost nuclear research universities. Yet despite his stellar credentials, Ethan found himself shut out of respectable work. His family name carried too much stigma, and the moment he was released from Kopesk prison, where he'd served 15 years for trafficking plutonium to Pakistan, he discovered that no employer would touch him. Even though Anton had been an alcoholic who treated him harshly, Ethan had grown up fiercely devoted to his father and learned to rely on himself. Now, fueled by anger and the desperate need to be recognized, he shouted into the empty workshop, "I am Iron Man. I'll make terrorists and Hydra tremble. My vengeance will be their doomsday." At that same moment, Anton lay dying in a sparse hospital room, his frail body propped against a peeling wall. Through the static on an old television, he watched Tony Stark's triumphant broadcast. Stark's flamboyant displays of power stirred unease in his failing heart. Summoning his last strength, Anton reached out to Ethan's side. "Son," he whispered, "everything Stark claims in the headlines, it all belongs to you." With those words of regret and a father's enduring love, Anton closed his eyes and slipped away, leaving Ethan alone with a legacy of bitterness and ambition. Chapter 7. Ethan watched with mounting concern as Ivan's obsession consumed him. Since his father's death, Ivan had blamed Tony Stark for every sorrow in his life. Fueled by grief and rage, he'd forsaken sleep and sanity, laboring day and night in the cramped, cluttered workshop he once shared with his dad. His mission: to assemble a modified arc reactor. An arc reactor twisted into a weapon powerful enough to kill Tony Stark. In another universe, perhaps his gambit might have succeeded. But here, Stark was no ordinary target. His strength and technology had advanced far beyond Ivan's reckoning. If Ivan confronted him in that crude prototype suit, dubbed Blood Edge armor, he'd be lucky to land a single blow before Stark dismantled him with 3 punches and 2 kicks, or, worse yet, a single concussive blast. Ethan's calculations were grim. Ivan's armor barely matched the firepower of Stark's retired Mk-55 suit, the very model Stark had just rendered obsolete. Now Stark's Mk-56 armor had hit the field, and it had overcome the persistent nanobot depletion the Mk-55 suffered. Inspired by the self-replicating nanites from the day the Earth stood still, Stark's new nanobots could pull metal atoms from the environment and duplicate themselves endlessly. That meant an infinite supply of microscopic machines. With them at his command, Stark could shift instantly from his standard armored form to a Hulk-level powerhouse, or even unlock a towering giant mode. This was black tech at its most extreme, and Ethan still didn't know how Tony Stark and Bruce Banner had engineered such a breakthrough. In the balance of power, there was only one certainty now. Tony Stark held all the aces, and any direct assault by Ivan would be nothing more than a desperate suicide mission. Ethan had seen firsthand how ruthless Tony Stark's new Mk-56 suits could be. With their advanced nanotech, even the patched-together plans Ivan Vanko once relied on were obsolete, and any Iron Legion prototypes Hammer Industries might throw into the fray would be dissected and absorbed just as easily. So when Ivan holed up in that frozen cavern, mourning his father and obsessively studying the blueprints he'd left behind, he never expected company. Without warning, a squad of operatives in full combat gear stormed the place. They moved like a single organism, quiet, efficient, and utterly unstoppable. Before Ivan could even draw his weapon, they'd seized him. As they dragged him into the glare of their assault rifle sights, Ivan's voice was icy calm. "Are you Stark's men?" "We are not," the lead agent replied, his tone flat. "We are Hydra. Ivan Vanko, you've sworn revenge on the Starks. Come with us, and we'll help you settle the score." Hydra. The name rang through Ethan's mind with all the weight of a distant thunderclap. For months now, his own careless tip-off about experimental tech had quietly fueled Hydra's resurgence. Thanks to him, the organization's shadowy reputation had blossomed into full-blown notoriety, enough that eager recruits only needed a name to sign on the dotted line. Ethan watched from the shadows, heart-pounding. He'd never meant to fan the flames of an organization this dangerous. Yet here they were, extending Ivan an alliance built on vengeance. Were they the liberators they claimed to be, or monsters in disguise? He didn't know. But deep down, he feared the answer. Ethan sat on the edge of his narrow bunk, the cold Siberian wind howling through the grated windows of the remote prison camp. News of Hydra's return had rippled across the globe, and even this far-flung outpost buzzed with rumors of their resurgence. When the heavy steel door clanged open, he wasn't surprised to see operatives from the re-emergent organization standing before him. A tall figure in a charcoal trench coat stepped forward. "Ethan," he rumbled, voice low and measured, "we've come for your arc reactor design." Ethan leaned back against the wall. "You're Hydra," he said, voice flat. "So what's in it for me?" The man gave a curt nod, and 2 of his companions, towering superhuman in stature, stepped into the cell. One's green-hued muscles rippled under his skin, the other's metallic skin caught the dim light. Ethan recognized them instantly, Abomination and Colossus. That confirmed his suspicions. These weren't imposters. All the resources you need, the trench-coated agent promised. Personnel, manufacturing facilities, R&D, Hydra will fund your work unconditionally. Ethan's mind raced. A lifetime imprisoned in squalor, unseen by the world. Now at last, he had an audience and assets beyond his wildest hopes. He stood, squaring his shoulders. Deal. They unlocked the cell and led him through icy corridors into the open air. As he followed, Ethan took stock of his escorts. Further ahead, he glimpsed the hulking form of Red Tank, his armored bulk casting a long shadow over the snow. Black Caesar, Hydra's elusive commander, remained out of sight. Ethan frowned. I don't understand the leader's decision, he thought, pressing on. Why send second-string agents when they could boast their gore? Eat as champions? Then again, maybe that was exactly the point, to make him chase Hydra's true superstars. Still, Ethan didn't care. He'd earned his freedom, and the chance to see his reactor come to life, and if Hydra wanted his blueprints, they'd pay in full. Why reinstate the son of that failed technician, Ethan? He's hardly a prodigy, sneered a hulking figure who hovered on 6 mechanical tentacles, his oversized skull dwarfing any trace of a neck. He fixed Ivan with a condescending glare. And who's the boy, anyway? Ivan bristled. That's Ethan, once expelled, now back under Hydra's banner. The newcomer snorted. I doubt he's worth the trouble. And you are? Dr. Hugo Stern, Ivan replied, chin up. Hydra's chief research scientist, codename Big Boss. For years, Stern's breakthroughs powered Hydra's most fearsome weapons. Yet whenever the abomination stole the spotlight, Stern slipped quietly into the shadows, eventually disappearing into a secret lab. No one noticed. But Black Caesar, convinced that Hydra must harbor a hidden genius, had long zeroed in on Stern as their true scientific mastermind. Now, with both Stern and Ethan at his command, Hydra's next move would be unstoppable. Chapter 176, Tit for Tat. Ethan stared in disbelief as the big boss's intellect exploded beyond all precedent. He couldn't assign an exact IQ score. Whatever number you picked would fall woefully short, but it was clear Stern had become something more than human. Better known by his acronym MODOK, he was already the Hulk's arch-nemesis, a cold, hyper-rational genius opposed to Hulk's raw, undirected rage. For 50 years, Big Boss had served as the perfect foil to the Green Goliath. The catalyst for this staggering upgrade was, of all things, the Hulk's own blood. When irradiated serum seeped into Stern's wounded skull, he braced for immediate death. After all, rumors swirled of other scientists who'd perished after ingesting banner-tainted concoctions. Instead, Stern emerged unscathed, his mind surgically precise, storing and processing data like the most advanced computer. He wasted no time. Day and night, he devoured scientific journals, military dossiers, clandestine research, even arcane tomes that few mortals could decipher. Knowledge piled upon knowledge until the man who once struggled with a rosebud's worth of data now held entire libraries in his memory. But this mental ascent demanded a physical toll. Stern's flesh took on a permanent emerald tint, and his skull ballooned into a grotesque dome, an unmistakable testament to the terrible bargain he'd struck with gamma radiation. Ethan had planned to turn to Dr. Bruce Banner for a cure, or, at the very least, for insight into stabilizing Stern's transformation. Yet with his new, boundless intellect, MODOK had anticipated that move the moment Ethan conceived it. Now, armed with preternatural foresight and a mutated body to match, Stern held the upper hand, and the world teetered on the brink of his next strategic play. Ethan slipped quietly into the observation gallery, his heart pounding at the sight below. In the cavernous chamber stood 2 of the Institute's greatest and most dangerous minds. Philip Stern, the long-rumored brother of Tony Stark, and Ivan Vanko, the renegade physicist known as Whiplash. Officially, Stark had no brother. Unofficially, everyone here treated Philip Stern as their unquestioned leader. Between them rested Stern's latest marvel, a crystalline neural interface, part computer, part organic matter, touted as the next stage in human evolution. Stern's tailored frame loomed over it. This, he declared in a cool, measured tone, is the pinnacle of mankind's ingenuity, a true union of intelligence and machine. Across the table, Vanko bristled in his metal restraints. The muzzle over his mouth hissed with every breath. Don't flatter yourself, he spat. For all your high and mighty talk, you've got the poise of a caged orangutan. Stern's lips curved into a lazy smile. An orangutan? Hardly. You're more like a Siberian brown bear, big, clumsy, and barely capable of abstract thought. Vanko's laughter rasped through the muzzle. Brown bear, he echoed. Good one. Tell me, brother of Stark, what makes you so sure you've outgrown your primitive ancestors? You parade this device around, but you lack the spine for true discovery. Spine? Stern's eyes glittered. I've seen your x-rays. You're a congenital freak, twisted from birth. Yet you have the nerve to claim you're the next step in evolution? Even leaned forward, straining against his restraints. Your underdeveloped cranium can't grasp what I've achieved. You think in triangles and boardrooms. I think in quanta and dimensional gates. Ethan watched, transfixed. Every barb, every icy retort sent a thrill down his spine. This wasn't mere posturing. It was an intellectual duel capable of igniting breakthroughs Hydra had only dreamed of. Stern's gaze hardened. He nodded to the guards, and Vanko's muzzle clicked shut. Enough talk, Ivan. Let's settle this with results, not insults. Results? Vanko's voice was a low growl. Have you ever watched a human hunt? Have you ever seen what a cornered man will do to survive? Ethan pressed against the glass, breath held. When two forces this brilliant and this headstrong clashed, the boundaries of science would shatter. Hydra's future would be written tonight, in sparks of genius, or in the ruin it left behind. No, let the hounds go first. Release the marvels. With that command, the chieftain blew a sharp whistle. From the shadows, two massive wolves emerged, their throaty whines sending a shiver through the onlookers. Ivan's eyes widened. He knew the North American gray wolf, the largest of all living wolves, typically measuring 180 to 210 centimeters from nose to tail and weighing between 60 and 80 kilograms. Even so, these two beasts dwarfed any specimen Ivan had ever seen. One coat was obsidian black, the other storm gray, and both stood at least 2.5 meters long. Their shoulders towered a full 1.5 meters off the ground, surpassing even the long-extinct Kenai mountain wolf, once the mightiest of canids at 2 meters in length, 0.9 to 1.1 meters at the shoulder, and up to 105 kilograms. These creatures weren't merely large. They were legends in fur and fang, each step seeming to shake the earth itself. Ethan, standing behind Ivan, swallowed hard. The foreboding sight of such titans, loosed as the chieftain's living weapons, was a brutal reminder of the danger they faced, and a clear signal that there would be no mercy for any who stood in their way. The two North American gray wolves standing before Ivan exuded a raw, predatory power that set his teeth on edge. He'd never felt so exposed. From the corner of his eye, he caught the boss leaning back in his chair, a slow, satisfied smile playing across his lips. Go on, the boss ordered, voice smooth as silk. He's the bone that grinds your teeth. These were no ordinary wolves. They were Hulk wolves, Ethan's brainchild and the boss's latest triumph. Using a serum derived from Banner's blood, the boss had already created Hulk dogs in another branch of his operations. Those hounds had been fierce enough to grapple the Green Hulk himself, but their usefulness ended when Banner's anger transformed his own strength into a limitless force. Now, thanks to Ethan's suggestion to try a pack animal, the boss had refined the formula to produce something even more dangerous. Wolves hunt in coordinated packs, and their natural ferocity was the perfect complement to the Hulk serum's raw power. What astonished everyone, though, was how adaptable these creatures proved to be. Far from the mindless brutes the boss had anticipated, the Hulk wolves displayed advanced neural development, expanded brains, the ability to learn through conditioned reflex, and an intelligence the boss likened to that of a border collie. They were cunning, fiercely loyal to their master, and lethal on command. Ivan swallowed hard. In that moment, he understood the true horror of facing a creature that combined the Hulk's unstoppable might with a wolf's savage cunning, and the smarts to learn from every strike. The boss's grin widened as Ivan's hesitation became painfully clear. Let's see what they do to you, he murmured. After all, you did volunteer. Ethan watched from the shadows as his latest experiment went to work, electric shocks and bouts of gamma-ray radiation to tame the two Hulk wolves. Even he admitted it was reckless. Ordinary wolves were dangerous enough under mind control, let alone creatures this smart and this powerful. When Ivan caught sight of them, he froze for only a moment. The Hulk wolves locked eyes with him, low howls rumbling in their throats as they padded forward. Ivan began to back away, but he didn't panic. Years of facing down Siberian brown bears had taught him that any sign of terror would only turn a predator's curiosity into a kill shot. He retreated with measured steps, keeping his gaze steady. Yet the Hulk wolves showed no hesitation. Their massive frames bore down on him like living tanks, heedless of distance or threat. Size alone wasn't enough to explain their confidence. Ivan knew it was the result of Ethan's radical transformation process. Hurried though he was, he refused to crawl on his knees before their ma. "Stir." "That's enough, Stern," came a drawling voice from the warehouse wall. Bronsky lounged there, arms folded, watching the scene with cold amusement. "You might want to think twice about how the great black Caesar will take this." Automatic rifles rattled uselessly against the creature's dense fur, and its jaws snapped through hardened steel like tin. A monster like this, not even someone like Ivan, an ordinary man, even if he'd been transformed into a beast, could stand a chance. Ethan raised his voice above the chaos. "All right, enough. Come back here. I've got meat bones for you." Every Hydra operative trembled in the presence of Black Caesar. None dared show him disrespect. His telepathic powers were absolute, an unsolvable enigma. The boss could still feel the humiliation. Under Caesar's compulsion, he'd stumbled into a public restroom, convinced it was a gourmet feast. Even now, the bitter taste of that disgrace lingered on his tongue. And Black Caesar's gift went far beyond mere mind control. He plumbed every hidden thought, every secret fear. No intelligence network on Earth could rival what Hydra owned, because Black Caesar knew it all, and could rewrite memories and personalities as casually as rewriting lines on a page. Such omnipotent mastery of the mind was terrifying. Ethan couldn't shake the thought that if Black Caesar's only power was telepathy, the crime boss wouldn't be quaking in his boots at the mere mention of his name. The real terror came from the arsenal of even more horrific abilities that Black Caesar wielded, abilities that no one dared face. Chapter 177, Competitors. Black Caesar's secret lay in a single fearsome ability, energy absorption. He could siphon off kinetic force, heat, radiation, radio waves, virtually any form of energy, and convert it into youth and superhuman prowess. The result was astonishing. Unrivaled strength, blistering speed, and near impenetrable defenses. To Red Tank and his dim-witted cronies, Black Caesar was nothing more than a living tank. They had no notion that he was feeding on their assaults. Ethan, however, understood the mechanics behind the power. As a scientist by training and the de facto leader of Hydra, he knew that absolute invulnerability was an illusion. If an opponent could unleash energy in a single, overwhelming burst exceeding Black Caesar's absorption capacity, it might trigger a collapse of his cellular stability. But to attempt such a strike would be to court disaster. The gamble was too great, even for Ethan. Still, there were debts to settle. Ivan had saved Ethan's life during the last mission, yet he bore a deep-seated hatred for both Ethan and the Hydra organization. Now, with Black Caesar temporarily neutralized, Ivan fixed Ethan with a cold glare. "Where are my resources?" he demanded. Ivan intended to use Hydra's vast reserves to engineer his own iron suit, and then turn it against them. Before Ethan could answer, a massive figure who'd fallen back toward the rear steps forward. His broad shoulders filled the corridor. His voice rumbled like thunder. "Come with me," he said to Ivan, motioning toward the hidden storeroom. Hydra's halls grew silent. A new contest was about to begin. Chapter 3. Ethan surveyed the holographic dossier floating above his desk. Profiles of second-tier supervillains, King Kong clones, mutated punks, robotic thugs. His strategy was always the same: recruit them, tap their powers for a mission or two, then dispose of them. With Marvel's endless supply of villains, running short on minions was never a worry. What bothered him instead was the lack of flair. He wanted subordinates with style and presence, not just another gang of misfits who'd stumbled into superpowers by accident. Meanwhile, 3 months had passed since Tony Stark first discovered the palladium poisoning eating away at his arc reactor. Down in his subterranean lab, Jarvis's calm, clipped voice broke the silence. "Daily blood analysis complete. Palladium concentration has risen to 8%, still accelerating." Tony rubbed his tired eyes. He looked every bit the genius in Crisis. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, fingers stained with fuel residue, a half-assembled gauntlet glowing faintly on the workbench beside him. Jarvis continued, Attempt 1 at element substitution, neutron bombardment, yielded no viable replacement. Cause, elemental instability. Attempt 2 likewise unsuccessful. No suitable alternative found. Recommendation, continue chlorophyll-based detox regimen. I don't want Pepper worrying, Tony murmured, his voice tight with frustration. I'll figure this out myself. He forced himself to stand, limping slightly as the reactor in his chest emitted its familiar hum. The pain was never far, each heartbeat a reminder of time slipping away. Yet beneath his bravado, he knew that pride alone wouldn't save him. Out there, in a world brimming with superpowered threats, he needed more than rapid-fire quips and ironclad armor. He needed an edge, and so did Ethan. Both men hunted power, one to command it, the other to survive it. In the coming days, their paths would converge in ways neither of them could predict. But for now, each forged ahead alone, driven by a simple truth. In their world, weakness was fatal, and victory belonged to the ruthless. Ethan couldn't resist pushing the arc reactor to its absolute limit, driving his palladium levels into the danger zone. Thanks to his body's unique self-regulation, he sidestepped the paralysis that would strike anyone else whose palladium concentration topped 80%. Most would be reduced to a half-living vegetable. For 3 relentless months, he tested every element he could lay his hands on. None sparked a usable reaction, and those that did were agonizingly slow. Cold nuclear fusion, long dismissed as impossible, continued to elude him. He knew thermonuclear fusion might deliver the power he needed, but it would also turn Stark's workshop into a searing griddle. Neither Ethan nor Tony wanted that kind of teppanyaki finale, so they kept refining their approach. Still, compared to the original timeline's desperate collapse, their prospects had dramatically improved. If no suitable catalyst emerged, Ethan had one last card to play, injecting himself with compound number 2. Rumors about its potential were already spreading outside the lab, and many were dying to see it in action. Ethan stared at the glowing readout and rubbed his temples. Tony Stark's demand for top-priority treatment didn't strike him as unreasonable. After all, they were allies in the Illuminati, but it still felt excessive. Compound 1 is potent, Ethan muttered. It can stave off the palladium poisoning for about 3 months before his condition starts to worsen. If Tony hadn't been pushing the arc reactor to its limits, he might have had years, maybe even decades, ahead of him. He tapped a few controls, pulling up the numbers. Even now, if he simply downsized to an external power source, a standard battery could keep his heart beating indefinitely. And removing the shrapnel near his heart is a routine procedure at this point. Minimal risk, major payoff. He shook his head in disbelief. The medical solution was straightforward. Extract the metal fragments, fit a conventional pacemaker or battery, then let Stark go back to whatever passed for a normal life. But Tony wouldn't hear of it. I need them in my chest, Stark had told him. They remind me who I am. I need the arc reactor. I am Iron Man. Ethan clenched his fists. He understood pride, even respected it, but not when it meant gambling with one's life over a symbol. S.H.I.E.L.D. had already dispatched its top specialists to the medbay, hoping to intervene before Stark's condition took a fatal turn, but their pleas only met Stark's ironclad resolve. What was Tony thinking? Life should come before legend, yet here they were, watching their friend choose the opposite. They'd known all along that Tony Stark was suffering from palladium poisoning, and they'd even secured a specialized antidote. Clearly, someone had been planning for this eventuality for a long time. How else could they have foreseen Stark's predicament? Howard Stark himself hadn't built the Iron Man suit with a hidden backup plan. So who did? According to Nick Fury's assessment, Stark should have been bedridden, maybe even paralyzed, months ago. Yet here he is, alive and well, showing no obvious signs of poisoning. Without a secret backdoor into Jarvis revealing the truth, anyone observing Stark now would assume he was in perfect health. Now that this cure has surfaced, Fury realizes Tony must have been quietly searching for a solution all along. But how did he manage to keep it hidden? In the original timeline, Fury is an expert at fishing, gently reeling someone in by extending a genuine favor. Men like Stark, tough exterior, soft heart, are especially susceptible to such tactics. Of course, to earn a man's devotion, You first have to show him real kindness. Without an initial act of goodwill, it would have felt unnatural for Stark to feel obligated to anyone. Ethan had just perfected a method to treat mild palladium poisoning, so Tony Stark would be hard-pressed to refuse S.H.I.E.L.D.'s help. On paper, it made sense for Stark to bypass intermediaries and come straight to Ethan. But Nick Fury's obligation to Stark wasn't a simple courtesy. It stemmed from Howard Stark's legacy, and Fury wasn't about to squander that leverage. Ethan, who preferred to keep his hands clean, had no interest in entangling himself in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s favors and debts. He had more important matters demanding his attention. Lieutenant General Alvin, who had returned from his last assignment with detailed eye and intelligence on the ant serum, sounded a warning. There was already a contender within Imperial Industries. This rival wasn't just any biotech startup. It was a heavyweight, one Ethan would need to take very seriously. Yet, the prospect of competition barely registered as a threat. Ethan stood to gain either way. If S.H.I.E.L.D. secured his serum, great. If they balked, he could always sell to the highest bidder, even if that buyer turned out to be a terrorist cell. What truly intrigued him was discovering what kind of monsters he was up against. After all, this ant serum represented a peak in biochemical engineering. Nothing on the market could match it, unless someone had secretly cracked bat serum. Chapter 178, Let's Go Tonight! Ethan folded his arms and studied the report glowing on the monitor. This new competitor is something else, his assistant remarked, glancing over his shoulder. He healed the vice president's daughter's shattered limb in a single procedure. Ethan didn't look impressed. You mean the little girl who lost her leg in that car crash? She's not even 10 years old yet. Her father has been scrambling for any treatment that might restore her mobility. That's right, the assistant confirmed. Until now, he'd been negotiating with every biotech firm in sight, even Imperial Industries. He thought you might have the answer. Ethan rolled his eyes. He thought wrong, he said flatly. I had plans to court the vice president's office back before we left the city, but since then, I've had bigger fish to fry. Unless he strolls in here himself, waving a fat contract in my face, why should I go out of my way to ingratiate myself to him? The assistant hesitated. But this new doctor's ability, it's unprecedented. If word gets out that he's surpassed Imperial's technology, it could shift the entire market. Ethan smirked. Let them talk. A single voice can be silenced with a well-timed Hydra operation. The vice president is only a figurehead. His influence depends on who's pulling the strings behind him. And those people, they're even less substantial than he is. He leaned back, smoothing the lapels of his lab coat. Biotech remains Imperial's monopoly. It's just like Stark Industries and their new energy breakthroughs, or Tony Stark's Iron Man armor that he refuses to license. We set the terms here. No one else gets to play unless we say so. His assistant swallowed. So, you're not worried? Not one bit, Ethan replied, standing and gathering his folder. We'll keep an eye on this rival, but if he wants a seat at the table, he knows where to find me. Until then, let him work for tips from the scraps we leave behind. He headed for the door. All right, we're going out tonight. Let's see if his reputation holds up under a little scrutiny. With that, Ethan strode off, already planning his next move. The rest of the world could wait. Imperial's future, and his own, depended on staying 2 steps ahead of every last pretender. Ethan and his partner wield astonishing power together, and it all comes down to 2 things. First, they command the 3 most formidable fighting forces in the country. In a land where strength still speaks loudest, it pays to have a truly devastating weapon at your disposal when everyone else suspects you might. Second, and even more important, is influence. The cutting-edge technologies they control aren't just tools, they're leverage, a one-of-a-kind monopoly on the core breakthroughs that shape the modern world. With that exclusive edge, you don't just defend territory, you mold global affairs and even steer the future. That's precisely why Imperial Industries has enjoyed near-total dominance until now. As long as they were the only game in town, their profit margins stayed fat, and no rival dared challenge them. The United States government knew it had no choice but to lean on Imperial Industries whenever unstoppable threats, like the Lizardmen supercriminals, reared their heads. But Ethan's sudden breakthrough shattered that monopoly. By introducing a credible alternative in biochemical arms development, he has forced Washington and the military to rethink their allegiance. Overnight, the balance of power has shifted. America's leaders now see Ethan's technology not just as a threat, but as a priceless bargaining chip in their negotiations with Imperial Industries. And even if his biotech innovations aren't yet leaps and bounds ahead, the sheer weight of American wealth and firepower ensures that Ethan and his partner have become the new power brokers in a game nobody saw coming. Ethan watched in quiet satisfaction as his rivals dug in their heels. They'd rather grit their teeth, overpay for inferior equipment, and spite Imperial Industries than admit defeat. Our stubbornness wasn't born of principle. It was a calculated gambit to force Imperial to innovate faster, to drive prices down, and deliver more advanced technology. If it weren't for Ethan, their defiance might have seemed reasonable. After all, for years no one had any choice but to accept Imperial's terms. But now the playing field had shifted, and those same critics believed they'd at last wrested control. Fine, they seemed to say. If you want that $10 billion defense contract every year, you'd better earn it. Naturally, Ethan's political opponents seized on the moment. They hurled opposition at Imperial Industries not on policy grounds, but for headline-grabbing soundbites, votes won by kneecapping both the Elephant Party and the Donkey Party. Yet when Ethan set his mind to something, a single word out of him, and it happened. Minutes after news of America's latest sanctions went public, Ethan waved at his secretary. "Tell the press, Imperial Industries will expand into Europe, forging new partnerships and opening fresh markets." Within the hour, the announcement was everywhere. No more stalling, no more posturing. Imperial Industries would prove it could deliver better, faster, and cheaper, wherever the battlefield required. Emperor Ethan announced today that Imperial Industries' latest venture has been officially named the Cross-Species Genetic Transformation Serum Project. According to Ethan himself, this cutting-edge technology could one day allow the mass production of super soldiers more powerful than even Captain America. At a hastily convened press briefing, Imperial Industries' spokesperson explained the company's next steps. "The North American market is fully saturated. We are exploring relocating our global headquarters to Europe, establishing a subsidiary in Asia, and withdrawing from North America altogether." Then came the bombshell. "Our lease here has expired, and renewal costs are beyond our means. A leading European nation has offered us an exclusive industrial zone, rent-free for a full century. We can't turn down such an offer." Across the United States, the announcement ignited a firestorm of outrage and speculation. News outlets ran continuous coverage, and social media erupted. How could a biochemical monopoly of Imperial Industries' stature be up against insolvency? When Ethan quipped that he simply couldn't afford the rent, it only fueled public anger. "He's lost his mind," critics raged. "Daring to thumb his nose at America. Someone arrest him at once." From coast to coast, Americans watched and debated. Was this a bold strategic pivot or the beginning of a corporate collapse? Either way, Imperial Industries had just shaken the world. "Don't let him get away." "How many carrier groups are we talking about?" Senator Martin pressed, running a hand through his graying hair. "And who's paying for it?" "We'll need a blank check for fuel, munitions, personnel. Never mind the political fallout if something goes wrong." A snort of derision came from Representative Bradley. "Sounds like we're more worried about the bill than the man." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew he was right. Ethan's bold play was the only thing keeping Washington from steamrolling him. If his latest move had been any less daring, the United States would have reacted with overwhelming force, and they could have. But Imperial Industries' grip on next-generation biotech made him too valuable to eliminate. "Colleagues," Senator Vasquez said, leaning forward so that her steely gaze swept the room, "I regret to inform you, Ethan isn't bluffing. Our intelligence confirms he's serious, and worse still, a European power has already replicated his breakthrough." A hush settled over the assembly. Imperial Industries' dominance in biochemical research was unchallenged. No rival came close to matching their innovations. Compound number 1, the age-delaying, combat-enhancing marvel, had earned unanimous praise at the highest levels. Now every military strategist, lobbyist, and defense contractor was clamoring for Compound D number 2, and Ethan was holding the winning hand. Chapter 7. The waiting had become almost unbearable, particularly for the wealthy clients teetering on the brink of death, desperate for a dose of Compound number 2 to buy themselves more time. They wielded their influence mercilessly against Imperial Industries, concocting every imaginable pressure tactic to force an early release of the life extension serum. Yet Ethan refused to capitulate. From their perspective, he was naive, a young upstart who didn't understand the real rules of capitalism. They labeled him nouveau riche, accused him of inexperience and sentimental folly. But Ethan weathered their attacks with surprising calm. He was neither fragile nor intimidated. He'd built his company from the ground up, and he knew the stakes. He wasn't about to gamble the health and safety of future patients for a quick profit. Word of Ethan's steadfast refusal spread quickly. Even Tony Navarro, veteran dealmaker and Ethan's longtime friend, had heard the rumors. One crisp afternoon, Tony strode into Ethan's office without warning. "Europe, really?" Tony asked, leaning against the polished conference table. His tone was part challenge, part curiosity. Ethan smiled wryly. "Not exactly leaving. We're expanding. Imperial Industries will soon become Emperor International. It's time we went global, far beyond the old Illuminati circles in America." Tony studied him for a moment. Ethan looked leaner, more determined than ever, almost as if the relentless pressure had sharpened him instead of breaking him. "So you've made up your mind?" "Completely," Ethan replied. "Once the rebranding is final, we'll have the resources and infrastructure to control Compound number 2's rollout safely worldwide." Tony pushed off the table and walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "You won't regret this," he said softly. "And you won't have to face those vultures alone. Let me handle their pressures. You focus on the science and on your Europe plan." Ethan nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thanks, Tony. I knew I could count on you." As Tony reached out to clasp his shoulder, Ethan felt a surge of confidence. Together, they would turn Imperial Industries into a global powerhouse and ensure that no amount of money or corporate blackmail could derail the promise of life-extending medicine. Ethan settled into the cabin chair as the engines hummed to life. Across from him, Tony stared out the oval window, his jaw tight with concern. "Is it true we're launching a human modification serum project with that other country?" Tony finally asked, turning back to Ethan. "This lizard serum talk, are we really going down that road?" Ethan offered a calm nod. "It's true. We're partnering to develop a serum designed to accelerate tissue regeneration and enhance cellular resilience. Think of it as rewriting the blueprint of human biology." Tony's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "As serious as it gets," Ethan replied. "We've got thousands counting on us. Scientists, investors, entire field teams. They're ready to move." He tapped the tablet on his armrest, scrolling through a roster of names. "A few people decided to stay behind in the States, but the majority asked to come with us under Imperial Industries' banner." Tony leaned forward, folding his arms. "And you think the risks are worth it?" Ethan locked eyes with him. "Every great leap has its dangers, but without bold steps, we'll never push the boundaries of human potential." Outside, the runway lights streaked past as the plane accelerated. Imperial Industries was about to steer the future of humanity onto an uncharted course, and Ethan intended to lead the way. Chapter 179, I Don't Want to Play With You Anymore. Everyone agrees that Imperial Industries is destined for success, no matter where it sets up shop. And to be fair, they have every reason to believe it. With the company pulling out of the United States, American access to Compound number 1 is about to get a lot more complicated. Until now, the U.S. never had to wait in line. Every batch was snapped up before anyone else even got a chance. Now, rumors say Imperial Industries is relocating to vodka country, all because of a ludicrous rent dispute. Ordinary consumers aren't protesting. Imperial's treatments are so high-end that even the famed Superman serum seems affordable by comparison. Why champion a company whose products remain out of reach? But the outcry is loud elsewhere. The World Health Organization, global charities, AIDS relief groups, they're all decrying the move. And the suddenly endangered middle class, those who have finally secured a spot on the Compound number 1 wait list, are up in arms too. These people aren't prone to knee-jerk protests, but now their very futures are at stake. Once you've injected compound number 1, you're no longer an ordinary human, you're something entirely new, and they refuse to lose that future without a fight. Across America, exclusive restaurants and private clubs for new humans have sprung up, venues reserved only for those powerful insiders who've received the compound number 1 injection. These establishments have become the ultimate status symbols, delineating a brand new social class. Ambitious mid-level executives, desperate to ascend further, once viewed access to these elites as their best ticket upward. Now that those doors are slammed shut, they don't know how, or even if, they'll ever get in. Even if they borrowed heavily, the landscape has shifted entirely. The catalyst was the collapse of Emperor Industries. Out of its ashes rose a new entity, Emperor International, which openly disregards American military directives. Emperor Industries is bankrupt, the announcement declared. We are Emperor International. If you want someone to answer for this, sue Emperor Industries. What can the U.S. government do? This fiasco was born from congressional compromise, and no one expects those powerful beneficiaries to accept blame. They'll find every conceivable way to dodge responsibility, just as they always have. If you find someone to take the fall, but they don't have enough clout, Ethan will just assume they're trying to provoke him instead of negotiating in good faith. And if they do have enough influence, who in their right mind would agree to take the blame? No one stepped forward, so they stood by and watched Ethan's company, formerly Imperial Industries, now reborn as Imperial International, pull up stakes and move on. Meanwhile, Stark Industries swooped in and purchased Imperial Tower. Ethan himself carried off only 2 things, a crate labeled Cucumber and the hidden basement beneath the old building. When that mysterious crate finally saw daylight again, everything about it felt slightly off, but its occupant was so quietly reserved, even more so than the real Broly, that no one heard a single complaint. A major European power proved delighted to host Imperial International. They granted Ethan a tax-free land lease for 100 years, with the option to renew for another century at the token fee of 1,000 rubles. After all, the territory was vast and largely uninhabited. For his Asian branch, Ethan set his sights on the land of the elephants, India, the so-called home of our Indian brothers, where population and resources both run in abundance. Ethan sat back in the dimly lit war room, weighing the dossier Hydra's analysts had just presented. The high volume of magical crime in this region meant one thing, an endless supply of test subjects and rogues ripe for Hydra's most controversial experiments. Yet if they didn't clean up their image soon, public suspicion would inevitably point to Hydra the moment Emperor International withdrew its forces. Turning this place into a headline for Hydra's brutality is the last thing we need, Ethan murmured. We have to rebrand before our operatives start looking like the enemy in the eyes of the locals. A strategist leaned forward. What about Xiaobaga and Xiaoshiba? He suggested. They're overcrowded, land is at a premium, and resources are all but depleted. If we invest there, we might turn a quick profit. But at what cost? Ethan interrupted. Injecting capital into 2 poverty-stricken backwaters will only inflate a bubble that bursts the moment we pull out. Besides, there's no strategic value in alienating the population over short-term gains. He tapped a map projected on the table. Now look at Brother India's territory. The population is enormous. Many are disenfranchised criminals or people regarded as less than human by their own governments. And yet, the land is still rich in arable soil, minerals, and arcane ley lines waiting to be tapped. Ethan's gaze hardened. If Emperor International moves in, controls those resources, and gradually subjugates local power structures, they'll effectively annex all of India without firing a shot. That gives us the manpower and the magical raw materials to build the cosmic army we've been planning. And we both know I'm not going to stay on Earth forever. He folded his arms, letting the silence underscore his point. The room was quiet, but the mission was clear. Secure India's bounty, reshape Hydra's reputation, and pave the way for a new order under Emperor International. With that, their next phase of conquest was set in motion. Ethan dreamed bigger than any would-be emperor. He envisioned leaving Earth behind, first emigrating to Mars and then onward to Venus, reshaping each world into a new, habitable Earth. In that moment, he wouldn't just be a ruler, he would be something far greater. Not merely an emperor, but the master of worlds. After all, who in their right mind would fight billions of desperate souls for a handful of resources on this tiny, fractured rock we call home, when 2 entire planets waited to be claimed? Mars was the logical first step, our nearest terrestrial neighbor, already the favorite target for colonization plans. But to Ethan, it felt too familiar, too bound by Earth's shadow. If he could choose, he would set his sights on Venus instead. True, Venus lay perilously close to the Sun, and its nightmarish environment had discouraged every previous venture. Surface temperatures climbed to a blistering 450 degrees Celsius, hot enough to denature proteins and vaporize water on contact. A crushing atmosphere of carbon dioxide bore clouds heavy with sulfuric acid, whipped into chaos by jet stream winds faster than any earthbound storm. No spacecraft could hope to land without being torn apart or melted. Yet where others saw only insurmountable obstacles, Ethan saw opportunity. He would perfect the technology to tame Venus's hellish skies, engineered habitats, heat-shielded descent vehicles, even chemical scrubbers to clear the acid-laden air. Step by step, he'd transform the planet into a second cradle for humanity. First Mars, then Venus, and beyond them, who knew? In Ethan's grand vision, Earth was only the beginning. Ethan knew that settling on Venus carried its share of drawbacks. Its crushing atmosphere, searing surface heat, and crushing pressure were nothing to scoff at, but he also saw undeniable advantages. First, Venus was a beautiful name, and he intended to accentuate it by bathing the planet in a soft, golden haze. More importantly, Venus teemed with untapped mineral wealth. Ethan wouldn't have to scour distant asteroids or dig endlessly for ores. The planet itself was a treasure trove. Better yet, he could transmute raw materials into anything he wanted. Turning the planet's ubiquitous soil into perfectly carbonated cola or piping hot fried chicken was child's play for him, and the results tasted better and were far cleaner than any Earth-produced soda or fast food. In effect, he'd created eat-the-ground cuisine, where the soil itself became your meal. Even if Ethan chose not to indulge his culinary whims, he could still leverage Venus's mineral and gold reserves in trade with Earth. Such an influx of new resources, however, risked destabilizing Earth's finely balanced industrial network. The moment Venusian ore and bullion flooded Earth markets, entire sectors, from mining to manufacturing, could buckle under the pressure. Humanity's tightly woven supply chains might fracture, sending shockwaves through the global economy. For Ethan, though, the endeavor carried almost no cost, and so there was every reason to go forward. As an added bonus, he looked forward to witnessing, from his golden-lit perch, the envy and consternation of Earth's leaders and citizens when they realized just how far ahead he'd pulled in the galactic race. Though the war for Earth still raged on, Ethan had by now ascended to the throne of an entire world, his own private empire. Under the banner of Emperor International, he resurrected the conglomerate's old ventures and even launched a bold new product, the Ant Serum. In Washington and beyond, intelligence agencies already understood the serum's implications, and they weren't entirely sure whether to fear or embrace it. Chapter 180, Doing the Opposite. Ethan knew his team wasn't incompetent, but he never imagined their backers would be so unyielding that they'd simply walk away instead of negotiating. At that moment, the Americans realized they had no way to rein in Ethan or to pressure Emperor International. After all, Emperor International commanded both military force and cutting-edge technology, so the U.S. had assumed it could dictate terms. When it looked like victory was all but guaranteed, everything collapsed. Nobody had prepared for this bold gambit. They'd expected Emperor Industries to cave in, as countless companies had before, hand over its best products, and then enter the market on American terms. Instead, Emperor Industries cut its losses and withdrew. Though the Americans regretted the turn of events, they weren't entirely out of options. At worst, they'd have to dispatch ships even farther afield, shell out more money, and queue up to buy Compound Number 1. And since money was already their most precious commodity, that prospect felt especially painful. Chapter 6. Blacklisted time is invaluable, but no fortune, millions or even billions, can buy back a tarnished reputation. They'd originally planned to let things drop, That changed the moment Ethan departed America and went public, insisting he'd been treated unjustly on U.S. soil. In a blistering statement, he declared that, from that day forward, anyone holding American citizenship or dual nationality that included the United States would be permanently barred from dealing with Emperor International. Their orders would be refused, their accounts shut down. To close every loophole, Emperor International imposed strict per-person purchase limits. Effective immediately, every individual, and yes, even large corporations, may acquire only 1 vial of serum alpha, 1 dose of compound number 1, and 1 unit of the so-called Superman serum. Any attempt to circumvent these caps, whether by proxy buyers or shell companies, will trigger an instant, permanent blacklisting. Then came the company's boldest announcement, the launch of Compound Number 2. Billed as the next generation of enhancement formula, it promises unprecedented power gains with sharply reduced side effects. Though full clinical trials are still in progress, the very reveal sent shockwaves through the biotech world. Rivals found themselves scrambling, not just to catch up, but to salvage whatever credibility they had left. Meanwhile, Emperor International stood firm, its lead unchallenged, and its blacklist growing by the hour. Ethan pressed pause on the livestream, stunned by what he'd just heard. On screen, the CEO of Emperor International was describing 2 revolutionary compounds designed to delay aging and preserve youth, essentially increasing human cell divisions and extending our natural lifespan. Compound number 1 allows you to remain fully functional and disease-free until at least 80, the CEO explained. In numerous cases, recipients have retained normal physical and cognitive health well into their hundreds. No Alzheimer's, no frailty or muscle wasting. He paused for effect, then continued. But compound number 2 takes it even further. After over 10,000 clinical trials and exhaustive data analysis, we're proud to announce compound number 2 is now available worldwide. Each injection costs $100 million, and every person who receives it can expect to maintain youthful bodily functions past the century mark. The announcement flashed across every major network. Breakthrough in human lifespan. Ethan sat back, mind racing. In an instant, America seemed to erupt. Wall Street indices surged, biotech startups doubled in valuation, and social media lit up with debate. Some hailed Emperor International as humanity's savior. Others called the price tag obscene, a privilege for the ultra-wealthy. For Ethan, though, it was more personal. He replayed the CEO's words in his head, imagining the possibilities, seeing his own future stretched far beyond what he had ever dared to hope. Outside, the city have on. Ambitious investors clamoring for shares, critics sounding alarms about inequality, and everyday people wondering if the fountain of youth was finally within reach. As the world reeled from this seismic shift, Ethan knew life as he had known it would never be the same. How provocative. He's taunting us. We must lodge a vehement protest against the vodka nation. They've resorted to illegal tactics to threaten Emperor International and published defamatory statements that tarnish our United States image. It's high time the Pacific Fleet mobilize for military exercises. This is no idle threat. The vodka nation has struck a deal with Emperor International. Their first legion of ant serum super soldiers is about to be deployed. Those troops were supposed to be ours. But can the vodka nation actually afford it? How many barrels of oil or cubic feet of gas would they have to sell to bankroll a supply of ant serum? Haha. They lack hard currency, true, but they offer resources and infrastructure projects instead. Aside from handing over banks or sovereignty, which they won't, their entire economy is up for negotiation. Emperor International doesn't necessarily need money. In any country, what isn't valuable? Roads and railways, bridges and ports. Every piece of public infrastructure, every key industry, those are all assets ripe for development and profit. Ethan sank into his leather chair and reviewed the latest proposals from Vodka Country. On paper, they seemed almost too good to be true. Emperor International would handle every aspect of their new biotech initiative, from initial research to full-scale construction, all in exchange for a token 1% royalty. In reality, Vodka Country wasn't about to cede control to a private company, capitalist or not. Their plan was to sign a joint development contract that guaranteed them ownership once the facilities were built. Essentially, They'd leverage Emperor International's expertise to do the heavy lifting, and then quietly reassert sovereign authority once everything was up and running. Across the polished table, the company's senior vice president frowned. "They're counting on us building it, then turning it back over," he summarized. "Do we really think they'll let us keep operating it?" Ethan tapped his pen. "Frankly, no," he admitted. "But if our partners in Congress and the major investors behind them believe this deal is worth their vote, we have to play along, at least for now. We don't actually pay them royalties," he explained, "so long as their 1% is purely symbolic. We front the costs, the labs, the factories, even the ant serum raw materials." He paused to weigh the reaction in the room. Look beyond the price tag. If compound number 2 lives up to its promise, giving patients a healthy lifespan past 100, free from Alzheimer's and other age-related diseases, the payoff will dwarf our upfront investment. Heads nodded. The concept of a century-long disease-free life had already seduced many of the high and mid-level elites who funded the project. Ethan leaned back. "For now, we proceed on their terms. Once production ramps up and the profits roll in, we'll have more leverage. Until then, we build together." He closed the dossier, certain that the coming months would determine whether Emperor International remained a partner, a captive, or something far more powerful. Ethan sat quietly at the edge of the conference table, absorbing every word as the industry's top minds weighed in. "It's simply unaffordable," one executive muttered. "A price tag of $100 million. No matter how elite you are, you can't just pull that kind of money out of thin air." "On top of that," another chimed in, "there's the citizenship stipulation. Only U.S. nationals can buy in. You could, in theory, renounce your American citizenship, settle elsewhere, then reapply, but who knows what Emperor International will roll out next? Compound number 3, compound number 4, the uncertainty alone is enough to scare anyone off." Some in the room had already begun eyeing Europe as a safer haven. With its comprehensive welfare systems, benefits that can amount to a significant chunk of a person's annual income, and the promise of stability, it was an enticing alternative. Especially now that Emperor International was building a new headquarters there, potentially sparking an economic upswing. As Ethan looked around, he recognized the sharp glint in his colleagues' eyes. These weren't daydreamers. They'd ascended to leadership through relentless ambition, natural talent, and an almost preternatural instinct for spotting opportunity. They knew that if a single corporation managed to outpace national policy, if Emperor International really did trigger a U.S. talent exodus, America might not see it coming until it was too late. Few could have predicted a private company wielding that much power. Yet here they were, living it. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He'd always believed that true visionaries prepared for every contingency. Now, more than ever, he understood why. With breakthroughs in both advanced technology and human longevity now in hand, the region's economic boom was all but guaranteed. Under those conditions, it was almost inevitable that Emperor International would spearhead Europe's recovery. "I never saw this coming," Ethan murmured, scrolling through the dossier. "The so-called rival is none other than Aldrich Killian, the supervillain behind the extremist virus."